In 1945, as World War II came to its bloody conclusion, a classified military operation uncovered ancient artifacts worth millions that simply vanished. The secret died with the men who found them, or so the world thought. Today, Thomas Blackwood sits in his rusted pickup truck, staring at eviction notices and final demands. At 53, the respected history professor has lost everything: his job, his home, his dignity. But in his hands rests his grandfather's journal, filled with cryptic maps and a haunting confession. I helped hide treasures that never belonged to us. Behind a thundering waterfall lies a cave untouched for decades. Inside waits more than $67 million in priceless artifacts, and a moral choice that will define what kind of man Thomas truly is. Because some treasures demand more than discovery, they demand justice. The morning sun filters through the windshield of a 1998 Ford F-150, casting long shadows across the dashboard where coffee stains mark the passage of time. In the driver's seat, Thomas Blackwood runs weathered fingers through salt and pepper hair that hasn't seen a proper cut in months. His reflection in the rearview mirror reveals a face with deep lines around the eyes, not just from age, but from the strain of maintaining dignity when everything else has been lost. The parking lot of the Walmart on the outskirts of Austin has been Thomas's address for the past 3 weeks. His academic credentials, a PhD in history with a specialization in cultural heritage ethics, mean nothing in a world that values youth and technological savvy over wisdom and experience. Thomas opens the leather-bound journal that sits beside him on the passenger seat. The binding is cracked, the pages yellowed with age. His grandfather's precise handwriting fills each page: coordinates, sketches of landmarks, notes in multiple languages. Some passages are in code, others in plain English, but no less cryptic. When the war ended, we thought our mission was over. We were wrong. The voice in Thomas's head as he reads is his grandfather's: William Blackwood, Army captain, member of the Monuments Men, the Allied Forces unit tasked with recovering artwork stolen by the Nazis. A hero, or so Thomas had always believed. A police cruiser pulls into the lot, moving slowly past the row where Thomas's truck is parked. He recognizes Officer Martinez, who has been kind enough to look the other way when store managers complain about the homeless professor who's been living in their parking lot. Today, Martinez doesn't nod in friendly recognition. Instead, he pulls alongside Thomas's truck and rolls down his window. "Morning, Professor. Manager called again. Says I need to tell you to move on." Thomas nods, his dignity intact despite everything. "I understand. Thank you for the heads up." The cruiser pulls away, and Thomas starts the engine of his truck. The dashboard lights illuminate briefly. The gas gauge hovers just above empty. Another problem for another hour. He pulls out his phone, an older model that still works despite the cracked screen. 1 bar of battery life remains. He dials a number he knows by heart but rarely uses anymore. "Sarah? It's Thomas. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important." Sarah Blackwood's voice comes through clear, professional, concerned. The divorce 5 years ago was amicable. 2 people who had grown apart rather than fallen out. As a nurse practitioner, stability is her hallmark. "What's wrong? Is it Rebecca?" "No, our daughter's fine. I need a place to stay, just for a night or two." The silence on the other end of the line speaks volumes. Finally, Sarah sighs. "The spare room is yours." "But Thomas, this can't be a long-term solution." "I know. Thank you." He ends the call, tosses the phone onto the passenger seat next to his grandfather's journal. As he shifts the truck into drive, the journal falls open to a page marked with a faded photograph. William Blackwood, in his Army uniform, standing beside a stone archway carved with symbols that don't look European. On the back, written in the same precise hand as the journal: Echo Project, Guatemala, 1945. The doorway to redemption. Sarah's house sits in a quiet Austin suburb, modest but well-maintained, with flowering bushes along the walkway and a small American flag by the front door. It was never their marital home. Sarah bought it after the divorce, a fresh start for her new life. Thomas parks his truck on the street rather than in the driveway, a small gesture to maintain some distance, to acknowledge that he is a guest, not family. The box containing his remaining possessions stays in the truck. All he takes is a small duffel bag of clothes and his grandfather's journal. Sarah opens the door before he knocks. At 51, she carries herself with the confidence of someone who has found her place in the world. Her hair is shorter than when they were married, streaked with distinguished silver that complements her sharp blue eyes. "You look terrible." Thomas manages a tired smile. Always the nurse. Direct diagnosis. She steps aside to let him in, and the familiar scent of her home, cinnamon and clean laundry, brings an unexpected wave of nostalgia. The house is neat, organized, successful. Everything his life is not. "The community college let you go? I thought you had tenure." Budget cuts, program elimination, my entire department gone. 28 years of teaching summarized in a 3-paragraph letter. Sarah leads him to the kitchen, gestures for him to sit at the small table by the window. She puts on a pot of coffee without asking if he wants some. Some habits remain from their 20 years of marriage. "Have you applied elsewhere?" Thomas leans back in the chair, suddenly exhausted. "Everywhere. School districts are cutting programs, not hiring. Private schools want younger faces. Online education companies want tech-savvy millennials who can create viral content about the Renaissance." The coffee machine gurgles, filling the kitchen with the rich aroma of dark roast. Sarah takes 2 mugs from the cabinet, one with the University of Texas logo, the other a souvenir from the Grand Canyon, a trip they had taken with Rebecca when she was 12. "What about that research position at the Smithsonian, the one you were excited about last year?" "Went to a 35-year-old with half my experience, but twice my social media following." Sarah places the UT mug in front of him, the coffee black, the way he's always taken it. She sits across from him, studies his face with the clinical assessment of a medical professional and the lingering concern of someone who once shared his life. "And the apartment?" "Gone last month. Couldn't make rent. Savings lasted through the weekly motel, then Jim's couch, then—" He gestures vaguely toward the window where his truck is visible. "Home sweet home." "Thomas, why didn't you call sooner?" He takes a sip of coffee, avoiding her gaze. Pride, stubbornness, the desperate hope that the next application would be the one. "Have you told Rebecca?" The mention of their daughter makes Thomas wince. Rebecca, 20, works for an environmental nonprofit in Portland. Smart, idealistic, determined. She inherited the best of both her parents. The thought of her knowing about his current situation fills him with shame. "No, and I'd appreciate if you didn't either." Sarah's expression hardens slightly. She's not a child anymore. She'd want to help. That's exactly why I haven't told her. She'd offer her couch, her savings, anything. I won't be that kind of burden. The silence between them is heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Sarah nods. "The spare room is yours for as long as you need, but you have to promise me you'll keep looking for work." "Actually, I might have found something." Thomas reaches for the journal he'd set on the table, opens it to the page with the photograph. Sarah leans forward, curious despite herself. "Your grandfather's journal? I remember you working on decoding parts of it years ago." "I never finished, but now I have nothing but time." Thomas runs his finger along the edge of the photograph. "And I think there might be more to his story than I ever realized." Sarah studies the image. "Guatemala? I thought he was in Europe during the war." "So did I, but there's a whole section of the journal that deals with something called the Echo Project. After the war in Europe ended, but before he came home." "And you think this is what exactly?" Thomas turns the pages, revealing detailed maps, coordinates, sketches of a waterfall, and what appears to be the entrance to a cave system. "I think my grandfather helped hide something valuable, something that might still be there." Sarah's expression shifts from curiosity to concern. "Thomas, please tell me you are not considering treasure hunting in Guatemala based on a 75-year-old journal." "What else do I have, Sarah? No job, no home, no prospects. Just this." He taps the journal. "My grandfather was meticulous. If he says something is there, it's there. And if you find whatever it is, then maybe I can start over. Give Rebecca something to be proud of instead of something to worry about." Sarah sighs, the sound of someone who recognizes the determination in her ex-husband's voice. It's the same tone he used when he decided to get his PhD while working full-time and raising a young daughter. "You'll need money for this wild goose chase, Plane tickets, supplies, guides. Thomas closes the journal, his decision made. I have one thing left of value. My father's Rolex, the one he gave me when I got tenure. Sarah's face softens with unexpected sadness. Oh, Thomas, it's just a watch. What good is a family heirloom if there's no future to pass it to? The pawn shop sits between a check-cashing store and a liquor outlet on the less prosperous side of Austin. The sign above the door promises top dollar for gold, jewelry, electronics. Thomas parks his truck, the grandfather's journal tucked securely in his jacket pocket, the Rolex heavy on his wrist. Inside, the shop is crowded with the discarded treasures of lives in transition. Wedding rings from failed marriages, guitars from abandoned musical dreams, tools from shuttered businesses. Behind the counter, a man with tattooed arms and weary eyes waits without expectation. Thomas approaches, already removing the watch from his wrist. The Rolex date just gleams under the fluorescent lights, its gold and stainless steel band slightly worn from decades of daily use. His father had saved for years to buy it, had worn it every day of his career as a high school principal. A man needs one good watch, he had told Thomas, something that shows the world he values time. The pawnbroker examines the watch with professional detachment, checking for authenticity marks, testing the weight in his palm. I can give you 4,000. Thomas had researched the watch's value online. Retail, closer to 8,000. But the pawnbroker knows desperation when he sees it. 5,000, it was my father's. The pawnbroker's eyes flicker up, meeting Thomas's for the first time. Something in the older man's dignity gives him pause. 4,500, best I can do. Thomas nods. I'll take it. The paperwork is handled quickly. The pawnbroker counts out cash. Thomas had insisted on cash, no checks, no transfers. $4,500. Enough for a plane ticket to Guatemala, modest accommodations, supplies, guides. Enough to follow William Blackwood's cryptic maps to whatever secret he had left behind. As Thomas pockets the money, the pawnbroker holds the Rolex, studying it one more time. Your father had good taste. He had good values. The watch was just a symbol. Back in the truck, Thomas sits for a long moment, the weight of the cash in his pocket a poor substitute for the weight of his father's watch on his wrist. He pulls out his phone, searches for flights to Guatemala City, books the cheapest option for the following week. Then he opens his email, types a message to the department chair who had delivered the news of his termination. Dr. Harrington, I'm following up on a research lead related to the Monuments Men and their classified operations in Central America. If the university is interested in potential historical discoveries of significant value, I'd welcome a discussion about reinstating my position upon my return. Regards, Dr. Thomas Blackwood. He hits send, knowing the reply will likely be polite, professional, and negative. But a man with nothing left has nothing to lose by asking. The Austin Public Library provides free Wi-Fi and air conditioning, two luxuries Thomas can no longer take for granted. He sits at a computer terminal, the journal open beside the keyboard, methodically researching every reference, every location mentioned in the Echo Project section. The information comes in fragments. Declassified military documents about operations in Central America after the European theater closed. Academic papers on the cultural significance of Maya artifacts smuggled out during the colonial era. Newspaper articles about William Blackwood's more famous exploits recovering Nazi-looted art in Europe. Nothing about Guatemala. Nothing about the Echo Project. It's as if that chapter of his grandfather's service has been erased from official records. Thomas opens a new search window. Types. William Blackwood, Guatemala, 1945. The results are sparse, but one catches his eye. A doctoral dissertation by Elena Cortez, Department of Anthropology, University of Guatemala, titled Colonial Extraction and Cultural Memory, The Displacement of Sacred Objects from Indigenous Communities in Post-War Guatemala. He downloads the PDF, scans the text until a familiar name jumps out. American military personnel, including Captain William Blackwood, participated in undocumented expeditions to several sites of cultural significance in the Highlands region between 1945 to 1946. A footnote references oral histories collected from the Cachico community of San Pedro La Laguna, where elders recall the map maker who asked many questions but took no objects. Thomas sits back, processing this new information. His grandfather, the mapmaker who asked many questions but took no objects. It contradicts the confession in the journal. I helped hide treasures that never belonged to us. What exactly had William Blackwood been doing in Guatemala after the war? And why had he kept this part of his service history separate from his celebrated work with the Monuments Men? Thomas prints the relevant pages from Elena Cortez's dissertation, tucks them into the journal. He checks the university directory, finds her email address, drafts a careful message. Dr. Cortez, I'm the grandson of Captain William Blackwood, mentioned in your dissertation on cultural displacement in post-war Guatemala. I'm researching his involvement in the region and would value the opportunity to discuss your findings. I'll be in Guatemala next week and would be grateful for any insights you might share. Respectfully, Dr. Thomas Blackwood. He sends the email without much hope for a response. Academic courtesy might prompt a reply, but why would a Guatemalan anthropologist make time for an unemployed American professor chasing family ghosts? The answer arrives sooner than expected. As Thomas gathers his materials to leave the library, his phone pings with a new message. Dr. Blackwood, your grandfather's name is well known in certain communities here, though not always in official records. I would be very interested in meeting. I have questions of my own. Contact me when you arrive. Dr. Elena Cortez. Thomas stares at the message, a mixture of surprise and validation washing over him. Someone else knows about William's work in Guatemala. Someone who might help him decode the more cryptic sections of the journal. For the first time in months, he feels the stirring of something like hope. The week before departure passes in a blur of preparation. Thomas researches the region described in William's journal, the highlands of Guatemala, specifically the area around Lake Atitlan, where several indigenous communities maintain cultural practices that predate European contact. He purchases essential gear, hiking boots, a backpack, water purification tablets, a high-quality flashlight. Each purchase is made with careful consideration of his limited budget. The bulk of his funds must be preserved for in-country expenses, transportation, guides, permits, if necessary. Sarah helps more than he expected, providing a proper suitcase, first aid supplies, and, most valuably, her medical expertise on tropical disease prevention. She doesn't ask again about his plans, but her assistance speaks volumes. Whatever their past, she doesn't want to see him fail. The night before his flight, Thomas sits on the bed in Sarah's spare room, the journal open to the most detailed map, a rendering of a waterfall with annotations about seasonal water levels, approach routes, and a marking that might indicate a cave entrance. The margin contains a note in William's precise script. The entrance reveals itself only to those who understand what they're truly seeking. Thomas traces the drawing with his finger, wondering what his grandfather had truly been seeking in that remote corner of a foreign country. Redemption, absolution, or something more tangible. Sarah knocks on the door frame, enters with a mug of tea. You should get some sleep. Early flight tomorrow. Thomas accepts the tea with a nod of thanks. I keep thinking about what I'm doing. Following a 75-year-old map to a possible cave behind a waterfall in Guatemala. It sounds like the setup for a bad adventure movie. Sarah sits on the edge of the bed, glances at the open journal. Your grandfather was a complex man. I remember how you used to talk about him, the war hero who saved art from the Nazis, but there was always something else there, wasn't there? Something you couldn't quite figure out. He never talked about Guatemala, not once in all the stories he told me growing up. Whatever happened there, he kept it separate from his official legacy. Sarah studies Thomas's face, her expression softening. You're not just looking for treasure, are you? You're looking for answers about him. About yourself. Thomas closes the journal, suddenly uncomfortable with her insight. I'm looking for a way back to a life with dignity. If that comes with some family answers along the way, all the better. Sarah stands, moves toward the door. Just be careful, Thomas. Some family secrets stay buried for a reason. As she leaves, Thomas reopens the journal to a page he's studied dozens of times, a sketch of an obsidian mirror in an ornate frame, accompanied by a cryptic note. It shows not what you are, but what you must become. Guatemala City sprawls in the valley between volcanic peaks, a chaotic blend of colonial architecture, modern high-rises, and improvised settlements that cling to steep hillsides. The air is thinner at this elevation, carrying the mingled scents of diesel exhaust, cooking fires, and tropical vegetation. Thomas emerges from the airport terminal into the bright Central American sunlight, his backpack slung over one shoulder, the journal secure in an inside pocket of his jacket. The crowd of taxi drivers and tour operators call out to arriving passengers, offering transportation, accommodations, guided tours to popular destinations. He navigates through the chaos with the careful attention of someone who has traveled extensively, but never as a tourist. His Spanish is academic but serviceable, enough to negotiate a fair price with a taxi driver for the trip to his modest hotel in Zone 1, the historic center of the city. The driver, a middle-aged man named Julio, glances at Thomas in the rearview mirror. Business or pleasure, senor? Research. I'm a historian. Ah, Tikal. Chichen Itza. Many beautiful ruins to study. Actually, I'm interested in more recent history, the period just after World War II. Julio's expression changes subtly. Not many tourists ask about that time. Dark years for Guatemala. What do you mean? Military governments, American interference, the beginning of decades of civil war. Julio shrugs, but that is politics. Not for a taxi driver to discuss with a customer. The exchange reinforces what Thomas already knows. He's entering a country with a complex relationship to the United States, where historical wounds remain fresh, where questions about military operations might be received with suspicion. The hotel is basic but clean, a colonial-era building renovated for budget travelers. Thomas checks in, secures his valuables in the room safe, then sends a message to Dr. Cortez announcing his arrival. Her reply comes quickly, an invitation to meet at the University of Guatemala campus the following morning. That evening, Thomas explores the historic center on foot, the journal in his pocket more for security than reference. The central plaza buzzes with activity, food vendors, shoe shiners, families enjoying the cooler evening air. The cathedral dominates one side of the square, its weathered facade a testament to centuries of earthquakes, revolutions, and resilience. In a small cafe off the main square, Thomas orders coffee and reviews his notes. The dissertation by Dr. Cortez contains tantalizing references to oral histories that mention William Blackwood, but few specifics about what exactly he was doing in the Highlands region. The journal itself is frustratingly cryptic about the Echo Project. William's notes are often in code or use military shorthand that Thomas hasn't fully deciphered. The maps are precise, but without context, they're just geographical puzzles waiting to be solved. A local news broadcast plays on a small television mounted in the corner of the cafe. Thomas's attention is drawn to images of protesters marching with signs demanding justicia cultural, cultural justice. The camera pans to show demonstrators in front of what appears to be a museum or government building. The reporter explains that indigenous communities are demanding the return of sacred objects currently held in private collections and foreign museums. A woman being interviewed speaks passionately about artifacts that were stolen during times of conflict and the ongoing spiritual impact of their absence on traditional practices. Thomas watches, struck by the contemporary resonance with his grandfather's cryptic confession. I helped hide treasures that never belonged to us. The University of Guatemala campus sits on elevated ground overlooking the city, its main buildings arranged around a central plaza shaded by jacaranda trees. Students move between classes, their conversations a mix of Spanish and indigenous languages that Thomas can't identify. He finds the anthropology department in a newer building on the eastern edge of campus. Dr. Elena Cortez's office is on the third floor, the door marked with her name and title. Thomas knocks, straightens his posture. Despite his current circumstances, he still carries himself with the dignity of the professor he was just months ago. The door opens to reveal a woman in her mid-40s with intelligent eyes and an expression of careful assessment. Dr. Elena Cortez is dressed simply but professionally. A white blouse, dark skirt, minimal jewelry except for what appears to be a traditional woven bracelet on her right wrist. Dr. Blackwood, please come in. Her office is organized but crowded with books, artifacts, and maps. One wall is dedicated to photographs of indigenous communities, ceremonial practices, and archaeological sites. Another holds framed academic credentials and awards. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Dr. Cortez. Elena, please. She gestures to a chair opposite her desk. And I should thank you. Your grandfather's activities in Guatemala have been something of a mystery in my research. Thomas sits, places the journal on his lap rather than immediately revealing it. I'm hoping we might help each other solve that mystery. Elena studies him with undisguised curiosity. How much do you know about your grandfather's work here? Until recently, almost nothing. He never spoke about Guatemala, though he told many stories about his time in Europe with the Monuments Men. And what changed? Why are you researching this now? The question is direct, bordering on personal. Thomas considers how much to reveal about his circumstances. I found his journal. A section I had never fully examined deals with something called the Echo Project and locations in the highlands region of Guatemala. He pauses. Your dissertation mentioned him. The map maker who asked many questions but took no objects. Elena leans back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. That's how he's remembered in some communities around Lake Atitlan. There were many Americans who came after the war. Scientists, military personnel, collectors. Most took things, artifacts, textiles, even people for study. Your grandfather was different, according to the oral histories. Different how? He made maps, asked about sacred sites, ancient practices, but unlike the others, he didn't remove objects, at least not that anyone saw. Thomas removes the journal from his lap, places it on the desk between them. His journal tells a different story. He writes about helping to hide treasures that never belonged to us. I believe he may have been involved in concealing artifacts of cultural significance. Elena's focus shifts immediately to the journal, her professional interest evident. May I? Thomas hesitates briefly, then nods. This is why he came, after all, to find someone who might help decode William's cryptic notes. She opens the journal carefully, treating it with the respect of someone who understands the value of primary sources. Her fingers trace the maps, the annotations, the sketches of artifacts that include the obsidian mirror, golden figurines, jade ornaments, and ceremonial vessels. This is extraordinary. She turns pages slowly, studying the coordinates, the coded passages, the detailed renderings of what appears to be a cave system. These are sacred objects from multiple indigenous groups. The mirror, for instance. This is a divination tool used by spiritual leaders in the Cachiquel tradition, and these vessels would have held materials for ceremonial use in Quiche communities. Thomas leans forward. Do you recognize the location he's mapping? Elena turns to a page showing the waterfall. This could be Cascade Sagrada, Sacred Falls. It's in a remote area between several indigenous territories considered spiritually significant by multiple communities. And these symbols? He uses them repeatedly in his notes. But I haven't been able to determine their meaning. Elena studies the glyphs with growing excitement. These are traditional markers indicating sacred spaces, boundaries between physical and spiritual realms. She points to a specific symbol that appears at the supposed cave entrance. This one indicates a portal or threshold that requires proper understanding to access. The entrance reveals itself only to those who understand what they're truly seeking. Thomas quotes from memory. Elena looks up sharply. That's a translation of an indigenous concept. How would your grandfather know this unless what? Unless he had been instructed by someone within the communities. This kind of knowledge wasn't written in books at that time. It was passed through oral tradition, through spiritual practice. Thomas considers this new perspective on his grandfather. In his European work, he collaborated closely with local experts to identify and recover stolen art. Perhaps he did the same here. Elena continues examining the journal, stopping at the photograph of William standing beside the stone archway. This is definitely from Guatemala. The architecture, the symbols, it's consistent with sacred sites in the highlands region. She turns the photo over, reads the inscription. Echo Project, Guatemala, 1945. The doorway to redemption. Her expression grows troubled. Echo Project. I've seen that name before in declassified documents I accessed for my dissertation, but the information was heavily redacted. What kind of project was it? That's just it. I don't know. The documents mentioned American military personnel, scientific equipment, and several indigenous communities, but the purpose was never specified. She returns her attention to the journal. This could fill in significant gaps in our understanding of post-war activities in Guatemala. Thomas feels a surge of academic excitement, the familiar thrill of historical discovery that has driven his career. For a moment, he's not an unemployed professor living out of his truck. He's a researcher on the verge of uncovering something significant. I want to find this place, the waterfall, the cave, whatever my grandfather helped hide there. Elena's expression turns cautious. If these are indeed sacred objects from indigenous communities, finding them would raise serious ethical and legal questions about repatriation. I understand that. I've spent my career teaching about cultural heritage ethics. Thomas meets her gaze directly. If my grandfather was involved in removing or hiding artifacts that rightfully belong to indigenous communities, I want to be part of making that right. Elena studies him, seeming to weigh at his sincerity. These communities have been fighting for the return of their sacred objects for generations. Objects that were taken during colonial conquest, during military occupations, during times of vulnerability. I know. That's why I'm here. After a long moment, Elena nods, coming to a decision. I can help you locate Cascade Sagrada. I've done fieldwork in that region and have contacts in several communities. But I need to be clear about something, Dr. Blackwood. Thomas, please. Thomas, then, I need to be clear. If we find artifacts of cultural significance to indigenous communities, my priority will be proper repatriation according to both legal protocols and the wishes of the communities themselves. Of course. Elena closes the journal, slides it back across the desk to Thomas. There's something else you should know. My interest in your grandfather isn't purely academic. Thomas waits, sensing a shift in the conversation. My grandfather was also involved in the ECHO project. He was a local guide who worked with the American military team. In family stories, he spoke of the captain who made maps and asked about sacred places. I believe he was referring to William Blackwood. The connection surprises Thomas. So we both have family ties to whatever this project was. Yes. And like you, I have questions that official records haven't answered. Elena glances at her calendar. I can arrange for us to travel to the Highlands region the day after tomorrow. We'll need to hire a driver, gather supplies. I'd be grateful for your help. As Thomas rises to leave, Elena asks one final question. Why now, Thomas? Why search for these answers after all these years? He considers deflecting, giving an academic rationale rather than the personal truth, but something in her directness deserves honesty in return. I've lost everything that defined my professional identity, my position, my security, my sense of purpose. This journal is the one thing that offers a path forward, even if I'm not sure where it leads. Elena nods, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes we need to look backward to find our way forward. The market in Zone 1 buzzes with activity as Thomas navigates between stalls selling everything from fresh produce to hand-woven textiles. Following Elena's advice, he purchases supplies for the journey to the Highlands, a better backpack than the one he brought, a hat for sun protection, insect repellent, and a high-quality water bottle with built-in filtration. Each purchase is made with careful consideration of his dwindling funds. The taxi from the airport, the hotel room, these supplies, all necessary expenses, but all drawing down the finite resource of his pawned watch. At a stall selling traditional textiles, Thomas pauses to examine intricately woven patterns that echo symbols from his grandfather's journal. The elderly woman tending the stall watches him with quiet assessment. You have good eye, senor. These designs tell stories. Thomas looks up, surprised by her excellent English. What stories do they tell? This one, she points to a pattern of interlocking diamonds and spirals, shows the connection between earth and sky, between physical world and spirit world. Thomas traces the pattern with his finger. It's beautiful. Did you make this? My hands are too old now. My daughter wove this one. She studies him more carefully. You are not like other tourists. You look, but you see. I'm a historian. I'm interested in the stories behind objects. The woman nods, reaches beneath her display to retrieve something wrapped in faded cloth. Perhaps you will be interested in this then, not for sale but for showing. She unwraps the bundle to reveal a small pendant carved from jade, its surface etched with symbols that Thomas immediately recognizes from his grandfather's journal, the same markings that appear on the map of the waterfall. Where did you get this? It was my father's. He was guide for American soldiers after the Great War. One soldier, an officer who made maps, gave this to my father as payment for helping in the mountains. Thomas's pulse quickens. This officer, do you remember his name? The woman's eyes narrow slightly. Why do you ask, senor? I think he might have been my grandfather, William Blackwood. The revelation causes a visible shift in the woman's demeanor. She rewraps the pendant quickly, tucking it away. You are the mapmaker's grandson. You have his eyes, yes. The way of looking closely at things. Did you know him? I was a child, but I remember a tall American who spoke some Kaqchikel words, who treated my father with respect when other soldiers did not. She glances around, then lowers her voice. They were looking for something hidden during the time of conquest. The sacred objects from the indigenous communities? The woman's expression becomes guarded. Some things are not for me to tell. But if you are truly the mapmaker's grandson, you should speak with Elder Mateo in San Pedro. He remembers more. Can you tell me how to find him? Dr. Cortez knows the way. She has visited many times for her research. The woman studies Thomas intently. Tell Elder Mateo that Lucia sent you. Tell him the mapmaker's blood has returned. Back at his hotel, Thomas updates his notes with this unexpected connection. The market vendor, Lucia, might be the daughter of the guide who worked with William. If true, it creates another personal link to the Echo Project and whatever his grandfather had been seeking in the Highlands. He emails Elena about the encounter, receiving a quick reply confirming that Lucia is indeed a valuable source in her research, and that Elder Mateo is a respected knowledge keeper in the San Pedro community. Thomas spends the evening studying the maps in his grandfather's journal with renewed purpose. The waterfall location, Cascade Sagrada, appears to be a day's journey from San Pedro, in an area where traditional territorial boundaries overlap between several indigenous groups. William's notes suggest that this liminal quality, being between established boundaries, was part of what made the location significant. The threshold exists where territories meet, where authorities blend, where no single voice can claim dominion. That night, as Thomas prepares for sleep in his modest hotel room, his phone buzzes with an incoming message. Rebecca. His daughter's name on the screen sends a spike of anxiety through him. Has Sarah told her about his situation despite his request? Dad, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a couple weeks. All good? Love you. Thomas stares at the message, considering how to respond. The gulf between his reality and what his daughter believes about his life has never felt wider. She thinks he's still Professor Blackwood, respected academic with a stable position, living in his comfortable apartment, planning for an orderly retirement. His thumbs hover over the screen as he weighs honesty against protection. Finally, he types, all good, working on a fascinating research project right now, actually. I'll tell you all about it when I get back. Love you too. Not a direct lie, but an omission that feels necessary. He can't bear the thought of Rebecca worrying about him, can't stand the idea of being a burden to her when she's building her own life. As he sets the phone aside, a new message from Elena arrives. Transport arranged for tomorrow, 6 a.m. Pack light, roads rough, bring the journal. Thomas checks his preparations once more. The backpack ready with essentials, the journal secure in its waterproof sleeve, the remaining cash divided between different pockets for security. Whatever lies ahead at Cascade Sagrada, he will be as prepared as possible. But as he drifts towards sleep, his grandfather's cryptic note echoes in his mind. The entrance reveals itself only to those who understand what they're truly seeking. What is he truly seeking? Financial salvation? Academic redemption? Family legacy? Or something deeper that he hasn't yet acknowledged even to himself? Dawn breaks over Guatemala City as Thomas waits outside his hotel, backpack at his feet, journal secure in an inner pocket of his jacket. The streets are coming alive. Vendors setting up stalls, workers heading to early shifts. the scent of coffee and corn tortillas filling the cool morning air. A weathered Land Rover pulls up to the curb, Elena in the passenger seat, a young man driving. She rolls down the window, gestures for Thomas to get in. "Thomas, this is Miguel. He'll be our driver and guide." Miguel nods a greeting, helps load Thomas's backpack into the vehicle. He appears to be in his mid-20s with the solid build of someone who spends more time in mountains than offices. His English, when he speaks, is accented but confident. "Dr. Cortez says we're looking for Cascade Sagrada. Not many visitors ask about that place." Thomas settles into the back seat. "Is it difficult to reach?" "The roads are bad, then we walk. But the difficulty is not the journey, it's knowing what you're looking for when you arrive." The Land Rover navigates through Guatemala City's morning traffic, gradually leaving the urban sprawl behind as it climbs into the highlands. The landscape transforms, concrete giving way to terraced fields, billboards replaced by views of distant volcanoes, the air growing cooler and clearer with each mile of elevation gained. Elena turns in her seat to face Thomas. "I've been reviewing what we know about the ECHO project from declassified documents. The official record states it was a geographical survey mission, mapping remote areas for potential development. But there are inconsistencies." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Equipment manifests include items that would be unnecessary for simple cartography. Spectrographic analyzers, portable X-ray units, psychological assessment protocols." "Psychological assessment? Of whom?" Elena's expression is troubled. "That's unclear, but indigenous communities in the region have oral histories about the time of questions, when outsiders came to document reactions to various scenarios. The implication hangs in the air, uncomfortable and unspoken." Thomas thinks about his grandfather, the war hero, the savior of artistic treasures, the man who told bedtime stories about outwitting Nazi art thieves. Could William Blackwood have been involved in psychological experimentation on indigenous communities? The Land Rover climbs steadily through the highlands, its aging suspension groaning against roads that deteriorate with each passing mile. Lake Atitlan finally appears below, a vast expanse of deep blue cradled by three massive volcanoes, a sight so stunning it momentarily distracts from the mission at hand. Miguel navigates the hairpin turns with practiced ease, occasionally pointing out landmarks that correspond to entries in William's journal. The terrain matches the old captain's sketches with remarkable accuracy, a testament to his cartographic skills even under wartime conditions. They reach Panajaco by mid-morning, the main tourist town on the lake's shore. Here, they will cross by boat to San Pedro La Laguna, where Elder Mateo awaits. The wooden dock teems with travelers and locals, backpackers bound for lakeside hostels, indigenous women selling textiles, fishermen unloading the morning catch. The public lancha, a long, narrow boat with a weather-beaten canopy, rocks gently as Thomas, Elena, and Miguel board. The captain, a weathered man with Mayan features, greets Elena with familiar respect. The crossing will take 30 minutes, enough time for Thomas to review the journal entries about San Pedro. "My grandfather spent considerable time in this community," Thomas notes, tracing the pages where William had meticulously documented local traditions. "These drawings show ceremonial sites, sacred caves, places that wouldn't appear on any official map." Elena nods, her voice lowered to avoid being overheard by other passengers. "The communities around the lake have maintained spiritual practices that predate Spanish conquest. During the Cold War, both American and Soviet interests were drawn to indigenous knowledge systems, shamanic practices, plant medicine, cultural cohesion mechanisms. You think the ECHO project was studying these practices? For what purpose? Think about the timing, 1945. The nuclear age had just begun. Military planners were already considering psychological aspects of modern warfare, how communities maintain identity under pressure, how belief systems survive disruption. Miguel, who has been silent, interjects with unexpected insight. "My grandfather told stories about the American scientists. They asked about dreams, about visions, about how the community would respond if sacred objects disappeared." The lancha cuts across the lake's surface, the engine's steady drone providing cover for their conversation. Thomas stares at the volcanic peaks, trying to imagine his grandfather here, a U.S. Army captain, fresh from the European theater, now tasked with an obscure mission in these remote highlands. San Pedro La Laguna rises from the shoreline, its buildings stacked up the volcanic slope in a jumble of concrete, adobe, and corrugated metal. Unlike Panajachel's tourist-centric atmosphere, San Pedro maintains a stronger indigenous character despite the hostels and cafes that have sprouted to serve language students and travelers. They disembark at the municipal dock, Miguel leading them through narrow streets where ancient pathways have been paved with concrete but still follow routes established by generations of foot traffic. Children play in doorways, women wash clothes in communal pillas, men return from fields with tools that have changed little in centuries. Elder Mateo's home sits higher on the hillside, a traditional structure with thick adobe walls and a corrugated metal roof that has replaced what would once have been thatch. A small garden of medicinal plants grows beside the entrance, their aromatic leaves filling the air with mingled scents of mint, sage, and herbs Thomas cannot identify. Miguel approaches the door, speaks in Utujil, the local Maya language, and waits. After a moment, the door opens to reveal a man in his 80s, silver-haired but straight-backed, with the clear-eyed gaze of someone who has witnessed nearly a century of history. Miguel introduces Elena first, then Thomas, adding the message from Lucia. The mapmaker's blood has returned. Elder Mateo's expression shifts, recognition and caution mingling in equal measure. He studies Thomas intently, then steps aside, inviting them into his home with a simple gesture. The interior is sparsely furnished but meticulously maintained. Photographs of family members share wall space with framed certificates, evidence of Mateo's role as both community elder and educated citizen engaged with the wider world. They sit in a circle on simple wooden chairs. Miguel translates when necessary, though Mateo's Spanish is excellent and he occasionally uses English phrases with precise pronunciation. So, Mateo begins, William Blackwood's grandson comes looking for what his grandfather found. You knew him? Thomas asks. I was a young man when the Americans came. Your grandfather spent many days in our community, asking about sacred places, ancient practices, objects of power. Mateo's gaze is direct, assessing. Unlike the others, he listened more than he spoke. The others? From the Echo Project? Mateo nods. Scientists, soldiers, men who measured and recorded but did not understand. They treated our sacred knowledge like information to be collected, cataloged, used. What exactly was the Echo Project? The elder's expression darkened slightly. They said it was to understand our culture, to preserve knowledge that might be lost. But their questions were strange. How communities functioned without certain ceremonial objects. How spiritual practices changed when sacred sites were inaccessible. Elena leans forward. Like a study of cultural disruption? Yes, they wanted to know what happens to a people when their spiritual anchors are removed. Mateo's gaze returns to Thomas. Your grandfather participated at first. Then something changed. He began to ask different questions, to make different maps. Maps of the waterfall, of Cascade Sagrada? Mateo studies Thomas for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. The waterfall has many names. To my people, it is the place where worlds meet. To the Quiche, it is the guardian's doorway. To the Cachiquel, the mirror of heaven and earth. And to my grandfather? To him, it became the path to redemption. Mateo rises slowly, moves to an old wooden chest in the corner of the room. Before he left Guatemala, your grandfather gave me something to keep. He said someday his family might come seeking answers. From the chest, Mateo removes a small wooden box carved with symbols that match those in William's journal. He returns to his seat, places the box on his lap, his weathered hands resting protectively on its lid. Why have you come, Thomas Blackwood? For treasure, for knowledge, for absolution? The question carries the weight of decades of guardianship. Thomas feels the full responsibility of his answer. I came seeking a way forward in my own life, but now that I'm here, I believe there's something more important than my personal situation. He gestures toward the box. If my grandfather was involved in removing sacred objects from indigenous communities, I want to help return them to their rightful guardians. Mateo considers this, then opens the box. Inside lies a stone pendant carved from jade, elaborately decorated with the symbols that appear throughout William's journal. This is the Wayfinder. It was created centuries ago to mark the boundaries between worlds and to guide those with proper understanding to sacred spaces. Mateo lifts the pendant carefully. Your grandfather removed it from a collection destined for American museums. He returned it to me, asking that it be kept safe until the time was right for its power to be used again. Thomas stares at the pendant, struggling to reconcile this new information with his understanding of William Blackwood. My grandfather stole artifacts from official collections? Not stole, rescued. Mateo's distinction is firm. The Echo Project was gathering sacred objects, documenting their removal, studying how communities responded to their loss. Your grandfather realized what was happening and took action to protect the most powerful items. Elena interjects, her academic interest evident. Are you saying Captain Blackwood sabotaged his own military project? He chose moral duty over military orders. Mateo offers the pendant to Thomas. He used his position to create false reports, to misdirect other team members, to ensure certain objects were recorded as not found or destroyed when in fact he had secured them. Thomas accepts the pendant with reverence appropriate to its significance. It feels heavy in his palm, the jade cool against his skin. And these secured objects, where did he hide them? Behind the waterfall, in a cave system known only to spiritual leaders from multiple communities. A neutral space where no single group could claim ownership, where the most sacred items could be protected until they could be properly returned. The realization hits Thomas with unexpected force. His grandfather hadn't been a thief hiding stolen treasure. He had been a protector concealing sacred objects from institutional theft disguised as scientific research. The journal. Thomas removes William's leather-bound notebook from his backpack, opens it to the page with the waterfall map. He documented everything: the location, the cave system, the artifacts. Mateo nods. So that someday, when the time was right, the objects could be returned to their communities. Why didn't he return them himself? Why hide them instead? The political situation made proper return impossible. Military governments, civil unrest, international collectors seeking indigenous artifacts. Returning the objects then would have put them at risk again. Mateo's expression softens with remembrance. Your grandfather intended to come back when conditions improved. But time passes, life intervenes. He wrote to me once more, years later, saying his health would prevent his return. Thomas feels the weight of inherited responsibility settling on his shoulders. And now, 75 years later, his grandson arrives instead. The mapmaker's blood returns, Mateo confirms, with the journal that shows the way, and now the wayfinder that reveals the entrance. Elena has been listening intently, her expression a mixture of academic fascination and personal connection. My grandfather, Antonio Cortez, was he involved in this protection effort? Mateo turns to her with a gentle smile. Antonio was the Echo Project's official translator. He worked closely with Captain Blackwood, helped him understand our languages, our traditions. They became friends, bound by shared purpose. He never told our family about hiding sacred objects. Some secrets are too dangerous to share, even with loved ones. The American and Guatemalan governments would have considered their actions treasonous. Thomas examines the pendant more carefully, noting how the symbols align with those in the journal. This is a key of some kind to the cave entrance. Not a physical key, a guide. Mateo points to specific markings on the pendant. These show how water flows, how light falls, how sound travels. Together, they reveal the entrance that remains hidden to ordinary eyes. The implications of what they've discovered begin to take shape in Thomas's mind. The cave potentially contains dozens, perhaps hundreds of sacred objects of immense cultural significance to multiple indigenous communities. Objects that have been missing for 7 decades. Objects that, according to Elena's earlier explanation, communities have been fighting to recover for generations. How do we proceed, Thomas asks? If these objects should be returned to their communities, what's the proper protocol? Mateo exchanges glances with Miguel, a silent communication that suggests complicated considerations. First, we must verify what remains in the cave, Mateo says. Time and nature may have affected what your grandfather hid. Then, representatives from each community must be consulted. Legal protocols for repatriation must be followed. Elena adds, there are international frameworks now for the return of indigenous cultural heritage. UNESCO conventions, United Nations declarations on the rights of indigenous peoples. And the value, Thomas asks, the practical question unavoidable. Some of these objects would be worth millions to collectors or museums. Their true value cannot be measured in money, Mateo says firmly. These are not art objects to be displayed. They are living connections to ancestral wisdom, tools for spiritual practice, vessels for cultural continuity. Thomas nods, understanding the distinction. His academic career had included extensive discussion of the ethical differences between monetary and cultural valuation of heritage objects. When can we go to the waterfall? Tomorrow, Mateo decides. The moon will be in the proper phase for the wayfinder to function at its strongest. I am too old for such a journey, but Miguel knows the path. He has been trained in the old ways, despite his modern appearance. Miguel inclines his head in acknowledgement of the elder's recognition. Tonight you will stay here in San Pedro. Rest. Prepare. Mateo returns the pendant to its box, hands it to Thomas. And reflect on what you seek, Thomas Blackwood. For Cascade Sagrada reveals different aspects of itself depending on the intentions of those who approach. The guest house where Miguel arranges their accommodation is a family-run establishment. Simple but comfortable. Thomas's room has a small balcony that offers a view of Lake Atitlan, the water now turned golden by the setting sun. The volcanoes stand in silhouette against the darkening sky, their perfect cones a reminder of the powerful forces that shape this landscape. Thomas sits on the balcony, the wooden box containing the wayfinder on the small table beside him. His grandfather's journal open to the pages detailing Cascade Sagrada. The discovery that William had actively worked against the Echo Project's mission cast his grandfather's entire military career in a new light. The war hero who saved art from the Nazis had continued his moral crusade in Guatemala, this time working covertly against his own government. There's a knock at the door. Elena enters, carrying a folder of documents. I've been reviewing what limited declassified information exists about the Echo Project, she says, sitting across from Thomas. I think I understand now what your grandfather was working against. She spreads several photocopied documents on the table. Most bear heavy redactions, black bars obscuring entire paragraphs, leaving only fragments of text visible. The Echo Project was part of a larger Cold War initiative codenamed MK Ultra. Does that name mean anything to you? Thomas nods, his academic background providing context. CIA mind control experiments, psychological warfare research. Most records were destroyed in the 1970s to prevent congressional oversight. Exactly. These documents suggest the Echo Project was specifically focused on cultural resilience, studying how indigenous communities maintain cohesion and identity despite colonial pressures. The military application was understanding how to fracture enemy societies by targeting cultural keystones. And sacred objects were considered keystones. Precisely. By removing ceremonial items and documenting the resulting community trauma, they were developing a blueprint for psychological operations against Soviet-aligned countries. Elena points to a partially redacted passage. This mentions artifacts of primary cultural significance and measurable social disruption following removal. Thomas feels a chill of recognition. The grandfather he had idolized had been part of something deeply troubling, at least initially. But William turned against the project, at considerable personal risk. These were the early days of the Cold War. Insubordination in classified operations wouldn't have been treated lightly. Elena gathers the documents, returns them to her folder. Your grandfather made a moral choice that could have ended his career, possibly his freedom. And now we have the opportunity to complete what he started, to return what he protected. Elena nods, but her expression remains cautious. We should discuss something else. The Wayfinder and the journal aren't the only reasons we can find Cascade Sagrada now. There have been recent developments. What kind of developments? A private collector named Marcus Hernandez has been asking questions in communities around the lake. offering substantial rewards for information about American military activities from the 1940s and hidden ceremonial sites. He has resources, connections, a reputation for acquiring indigenous artifacts through questionable means. You think he's looking for the same cave? It's possible. Information spreads, secrets erode with time. If he's heard rumors about valuable artifacts hidden during the Echo Project, he would be motivated to find them before they're officially documented and protected under international heritage laws. The revelation adds urgency to their mission. What had begun as a personal quest now carries broader implications. If these sacred objects fall into the hands of a private collector, they might disappear into the shadowy world of illegal antiquities trading, their cultural significance reduced to monetary value. We should leave at first light, Thomas says, before this Hernandez character can interfere. The night passes with fitful sleep, Thomas's dreams filled with fragments of his grandfather's experiences, military uniforms, cave entrances, indigenous ceremonies, classified documents with blacked-out sections. The boundaries between generations blur, William's moral dilemma becoming Thomas's inherited responsibility. Dawn arrives with a light rain, mist clinging to the volcanic slopes surrounding Lake Atitlan. Miguel appears at the guest house as arranged, carrying additional supplies: ropes, better flashlights, extra water. His demeanor has changed subtly since Mateo's recognition of his traditional training. The casual young driver now moves with the focused purpose of someone embarking on a significant mission. They depart by boat, crossing to a less developed section of shoreline where no proper dock exists. Miguel guides the craft to a rocky landing, helps secure it, then leads the way up a barely visible trail that winds through dense vegetation. This path is not on tourist maps, he explains as they climb. It connects sacred sites known only to traditional knowledge keepers. The trail grows steeper, occasionally requiring them to use hands as well as feet to navigate particularly challenging sections. Thomas, despite reasonable physical condition for his age, feels the strain of elevation and exertion. Elena moves with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to fieldwork, while Miguel seems entirely unaffected by the difficult terrain. After 2 hours of steady climbing, they reach a ridgeline that offers a panoramic view of the lake below. The morning mist has burned away, revealing the full majestic sweep of water surrounded by volcanic peaks. Miguel pauses, allowing them to rest and reorient. From here, we follow the ridge for 1 hour, then descend into the valley beyond. Cascade Sagrada is at the head of that valley, hidden from view until the final approach. Thomas consults the journal, comparing William's hand-drawn map with the landscape before them. The correlation is remarkable, every major feature accurately rendered, with annotations about seasonal variations in water flow, vegetation patterns, and potential hazards. My grandfather was here in the dry season, Thomas notes. The waterfall would have been less powerful then. That is both good and bad, Miguel responds. Lower water means easier access behind the falls, but also less force to conceal the cave entrance. Your grandfather chose his timing carefully. As they continue along the ridgeline, Elena engages Miguel in conversation about his training as a traditional knowledge keeper. His answers reveal a complex negotiation between modern education and ancient wisdom. University studies in environmental science complemented by ceremonial initiations and oral traditions passed through generations. Many of my generation have left these ways behind, Miguel explains. They see greater opportunities in tourism, in technology, in joining the global economy. I do not blame them. Poverty is a powerful motivator, but someone must maintain the knowledge, the practices, the connections to place and ancestry. The sincerity in his voice resonates with Thomas's own academic commitment to cultural preservation. Though Miguel's stake is far more personal and direct, the young guide isn't studying traditions. He's living them, carrying them forward in a rapidly changing world. The ridgeline trail eventually begins to descend, switchbacking down into a valley that grows increasingly lush with vegetation. The temperature drops as they enter a microclimate created by constant moisture from the waterfall that remains hidden from view, but whose presence is announced by the steadily increasing sound of falling water. Miguel stops abruptly, raising his hand for silence. He points to a disturbed area beside the trail, broken branches, scuffed earth, a cigarette butt that couldn't have been there long given the damp conditions. Someone has come this way recently. Multiple people. Elena and Thomas exchange concerned glances. Could Hernandez and his team already be ahead of them? How recently? Thomas asks. Miguel kneels, examines the signs more carefully. Yesterday, perhaps the day before. A group of 3 or 4. They carried heavy equipment. The discovery accelerates their pace, caution now balanced against urgency. The sound of the waterfall grows louder as they continue downward, until finally the trail turns sharply and Cascade Sagrada reveals itself in spectacular fashion. The waterfall drops nearly 200 feet in a double cascade, 2 parallel columns of water plunging from a limestone cliff, joining in a turbulent pool below. Mist rises in a perpetual cloud, creating rainbows where sunlight penetrates the canopy. The surrounding vegetation is impossibly green, nourished by constant moisture. But they are not alone. Near the pool at the base of the falls, a small camp has been established. 2 modern expedition tents, equipment cases bearing the logo of a private archaeological services company, portable generators powering work lights despite the daylight. 3 men move around the camp, one photographing the waterfall from various angles, another consulting what appears to be a topographical map spread on a folding table, the third checking diving equipment laid out on a tarp. Hernandez's team, Elena whispers. They're preparing to search behind the waterfall. Miguel guides them to a concealed position where they can observe without being seen. The team at the camp works with professional efficiency, methodically documenting the site and preparing for underwater exploration of the pool and waterfall base. They don't have the wayfinder, Thomas notes. They're searching blindly. But with advanced equipment and diving gear, Elena counters, given enough time, they could find the entrance through sheer persistence. Miguel studies the team with narrowed eyes. The one with the map, I recognize him, Marco Diaz. He works for private collectors, locating artifacts for extraction. He has no respect for sacred sites or community ownership. The situation demands reconsideration of their approach. Direct confrontation would be unwise. They are outnumbered, and Hernandez's team likely has legal permits for archaeological survey work, whatever their actual intentions. We need to wait until nightfall, Thomas decides. The journal mentions that certain aspects of the cave entrance are visible only under specific light conditions. My grandfather mapped the approach through the waterfall during a full moon, which happens to be tonight. Elena nods agreement. We can establish our own position on the other side of the pool, observe their progress, and wait for the right moment. They retreat from their observation point, circling around to approach the waterfall from the opposite direction. Miguel leads them to a sheltered overhang where they can rest and prepare while maintaining visual contact with Hernandez's team. As afternoon turns to evening, the activities at the opposing camps shift focus. The team sets up powerful spotlights, illuminating the base of the waterfall. One man dons diving gear and enters the pool, a safety line connecting him to his colleagues on shore. He disappears behind the curtain of falling water repeatedly, each time returning to report findings that appear to frustrate the team leader. They're searching methodically, Elena observes. Grid pattern, working from left to right. Professional approach. But wrong approach, Miguel adds. The entrance is not found through such methods. The wayfinder must be used as the ancients intended. Darkness falls completely, the jungle night alive with sounds of insects and nocturnal creatures. The full moon rises above the valley rim, its light creating an ethereal quality as it interacts with the waterfall's mist. Thomas removes the wayfinder from its protective box, holds it up to catch the moonlight. The jade pendant seems to absorb and amplify the lunar glow, the carved symbols becoming more prominent, almost animated in the changing illumination. As Thomas turns it slowly, certain markings align with features of the waterfall. The twin columns of water, the central junction where they meet, the rock formation partially hidden by the cascade. It's a projection guide, Thomas realizes. The symbols show how moonlight refracts through the water to reveal the cave entrance. Miguel nods approvingly. This is the knowledge that cannot be found in books or measured with instruments. This is why the old ones created such tools, to ensure sacred places could be found only by those with proper understanding. Across the pool, Hernandez's team has ended their diving attempts for the night. They gather around their camp table, examining photographs and comparing notes, occasionally glancing at the waterfall with evident frustration. "Now is our chance," Elena whispers, while they're distracted with their assessment. Thomas takes the lead, wayfinder in hand, moving carefully along the rocky edge of the pool opposite from the other team's position. The noise of the waterfall masks their movement, and the play of moonlight and shadow provides additional concealment. As they approach the base of the cascade, Thomas holds the wayfinder at eye level, aligning its markings with the waterfall as the moonlight creates refractive patterns through the falling water. A particular combination of light, water, and perspective suddenly reveals what the naked eye alone cannot see. A narrow opening behind the leftmost column of water, accessible via a natural stone ledge that remains above the pool's surface. "There," Thomas points, just as my grandfather described it. The entrance would be nearly impossible to find without the specific guidance of the wayfinder and the journal's annotations about moon positioning. No wonder Hernandez's team, despite their professional methods and equipment, had failed to locate it. Miguel leads the way, his sure-footed advance demonstrating familiarity with similar sacred sites. The stone ledge is slippery with constant spray, requiring careful navigation, but it provides access to the narrow opening that would be completely invisible from most angles. One by one, they slip behind the curtain of water, the roar becoming deafening as tons of water crash down mere feet away. The passage beyond is initially tight, requiring them to move sideways, but it soon opens into a larger cavern where the noise of the waterfall diminishes enough for conversation. Their flashlights reveal a space of breathtaking natural beauty. Limestone formations created over millennia, walls glittering with mineral deposits, the floor worn smooth by ancient water flows. But what captures their attention immediately are the clear signs of human modification. Carved steps leading deeper into the cave system, symbols etched into key positions, small niches that might once have held offering materials. "This is it," Elena whispers, her voice filled with academic awe. A ceremonial cave complex used by pre-colonial Maya, later adapted as a hiding place by your grandfather. They advance cautiously, following the carved steps downward. The main passage branches occasionally, but symbols matching those in William's journal mark the correct path. Thomas recognizes his grandfather's methodology, the same systematic approach he had used in Europe when documenting hidden art repositories. The passage eventually opens into a larger chamber where the ceiling rises nearly 20 feet above them. Their flashlights cannot illuminate the entire space at once, creating an impression of vast darkness punctuated by revealed sections, stalactites hanging like stone daggers, walls bearing ancient paintings partially obscured by mineral deposits. Miguel pauses, removing a small bundle from his pack. He unwraps traditional materials, copal incense, matches, a small ceramic vessel. With practiced movements, he lights the incense, murmurs words in Sutujil, then leads them forward with the aromatic smoke creating a thin trail behind them. "We enter sacred space with proper respect," he explains. "We acknowledge those who came before, those who created this place, those who protect it still." Thomas feels a growing sense of connection across time, to the ancient Maya who first used this cave for ceremonies, to his grandfather who recognized its significance and repurposed it to protect cultural heritage, to Miguel who maintains the traditions that give this place meaning beyond its physical characteristics. At the chamber's far end, a stone doorway has been sealed with a carefully constructed wall of fitted rocks, not cemented but arranged with such precision that they have remained in place for decades. The wall bears markings that match a specific page in William's journal, a simple design that might appear decorative to casual observation, but actually indicates a removal sequence. Elena examines the wall carefully. "This is remarkable craftsmanship. Your grandfather must have worked with local stonemasters. See how these rocks interlock? They're supporting each other through counterbalancing weight, like a dry stone wall but with greater complexity." Thomas consults the journal, comparing the diagram with the actual construction. According to his notes, removing this central stone first releases the locking mechanism. The stone in question is roughly rectangular, about the size of a bread loaf, distinguished by a natural vein of quartz running through its center. Thomas grasps it carefully, applies steady pressure outward as indicated in the journal. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the stone slides forward with surprising ease. Once the keystone is removed, the wall's sophisticated design becomes apparent. Each subsequent stone can now be extracted in a specific sequence, gradually opening an access point without collapsing the entire structure. The process takes nearly 20 minutes, requiring concentration and patience. Finally, an opening large enough to pass through has been created. Miguel goes first, the incense smoke preceding him, followed by Elena, then Thomas. Their flashlights reveal a space that causes all three to stop in wordless amazement. Beyond the stone doorway lies a chamber that has remained untouched since William Blackwood sealed it in 1945. Artifacts from multiple indigenous traditions have been arranged with museum-like precision. Golden figurines representing deities and spiritual concepts, jade ornaments carved with intricate symbolism, ceramic vessels decorated with cosmological imagery, textiles preserved in sealed containers, ritual implements of stone, bone, and metal. Each item rests on a platform raised above floor level, protected from potential water damage. Each bears a small tag with alphanumeric codes that correspond to entries in William's journal. Location of origin, cultural affiliation, ceremonial purpose, date of rescue from the Echo Project's collection. My God, Elena breathes, her academic training momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer impact of the discovery. This is unprecedented. These objects span multiple centuries, multiple Maya traditions. Some of these were thought lost forever. Miguel moves through the chamber with reverent steps, occasionally pausing to make subtle gestures of respect toward particular items. These are not mere artifacts. These are spiritual embodiments, living connections to ancestral wisdom. Thomas approaches a central display where a single object commands particular attention, an obsidian mirror in an ornate frame of jade and gold, its black surface reflecting their flashlight beams in unexpected patterns. This is the mirror depicted in William's journal, the one accompanied by the cryptic note. It shows not what you are, but what you must become. The mirror surface is not flat, but slightly convex, creating distortions in anything reflected. As Thomas draws closer, his own reflection seems to shift and change, features rearranging themselves in subtle ways that create an unsettling effect. Still recognizably him, but altered in ways difficult to articulate. The vision mirror, Miguel explains, used by spiritual leaders to see beyond ordinary perception, to glimpse possible futures, to understand deeper truths. It is said to reflect the inner self rather than the outer appearance. Thomas finds himself transfixed by the shifting image, feeling a strange connection to his grandfather, who must have stood in this same spot, seeing his own reflection transformed by the ancient artifact's mysterious properties. The moment of contemplation is broken by a sound that freezes all three in place, voices echoing from the passage they had traversed, flashlight beams visible through the partially dismantled stone wall. "Hernandez's team," Elena whispers. "They must have seen our lights, or followed our trail." Thomas makes a quick decision. "Miguel, take Elena deeper into the cave system. According to the journal, there are secondary chambers, possibly another exit. I'll delay them, try to negotiate." Elena starts to protest, but Miguel grasps the strategic necessity, guiding her toward a smaller passage visible at the rear of the chamber. Thomas turns to face the approaching team, positioning himself between them and the collection of sacred objects. Three men enter through the opening in the wall, led by a figure who carries himself with the confident authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. Marco Diaz, presumably, the specialist Miguel had identified at the camp. Behind him, two younger men with the muscular builds of professional excavators or security personnel. "Dr. Blackwood, I presume," Diaz says, his English accented but fluent. "Your reputation precedes you. Or perhaps, I should say, your grandfather's reputation." Thomas maintains a calm exterior despite the rapid calculations running through his mind. How does Diaz know who he is? How much does he know about William's connection to this place? "You seem to have me at a disadvantage, Mr. Diaz, Marco Diaz, archaeological consultant for Mr. Hernandez. We've been tracking your movements since Guatemala City." He glances around the chamber, professional assessment mixed with undisguised acquisitiveness. "Quite a collection the captain assembled. Mr. Hernandez will be most impressed." These objects aren't available for private acquisition, Thomas states firmly. They're sacred items that belong to indigenous communities around Lake Atitlan. My grandfather protected them from misappropriation during the ECHO project. I intend to ensure they're properly repatriated. Diaz smiles, the expression not reaching his eyes. Noble sentiments, Professor, but perhaps premature. These artifacts have existed in legal limbo for 75 years. Their ownership status is complicated, not to the communities they were stolen from. Stolen is such a charged word. Collected for preservation during a period of political instability might be more accurate. Diaz moves further into the chamber, examining specific items with professional interest. Regardless, Mr. Hernandez has obtained legal permits for archaeological recovery in this region. Any finds technically fall under those permits until proper provenance can be established. The claim is dubious at best, likely exploiting loopholes in Guatemalan antiquities laws, but it creates a troubling legal ambiguity that could take years to resolve in courts, during which time these sacred objects might disappear into private collections, their cultural significance subordinated to their market value. "Where are your companions?" Diaz asked casually, noting the additional flashlight beams visible deeper in the cave system. "The anthropologist and the local guide, perhaps they can join our discussion about the proper disposition of these artifacts." Before Thomas can respond, a new sound interrupts the tense exchange. Voices from the passage leading to the waterfall, speaking rapid Spanish with the distinctive cadence of official authority. Diaz's expression shifts from confidence to concern. One of his associates moves to the partially dismantled wall, peers through, then turns back with urgent whispers. "Policía Cultural, Departamento de Patrimonio." Cultural Police, Heritage Department, Guatemala's specialized law enforcement unit tasked with protecting archaeological sites and preventing antiquities trafficking. The situation has suddenly become more complex. Thomas weighs his options, recognizing that the arrival of official authorities could either help or hinder the ultimate goal of returning these objects to their rightful communities. "Did you alert them?" Diaz asked Thomas, suspicion evident in his tone. "No, but I'm not surprised they're here. Sacred sites are protected under Guatemalan law." The sound of official voices grows louder, flashlight beams now visible through the opening in the wall. Diaz makes a quick decision, gesturing to his associates to step back from the more valuable artifacts, adopting the posture of legitimate researchers rather than potential looters. 4 officers enter the chamber, their uniforms marking them as members of Guatemala's Cultural Heritage Protection Unit. They survey the scene with professional assessment, the collection of artifacts, the group of people now frozen in tableau, the partially dismantled wall that had protected this chamber for decades. The lead officer addresses them in Spanish, then switches to English when he recognizes foreign nationals present. "This site has not been registered with the Department of Cultural Heritage. You are conducting unauthorized excavation of protected artifacts. Identification, please, from everyone." IDs are produced and examined. The officers consult documents, make radio calls, maintain a professional but unyielding presence that effectively prevents anyone from leaving with artifacts. "Professor Blackwood," the lead officer eventually addresses Thomas directly, "we received information that you might be involved in locating unregistered indigenous artifacts. Would you explain your presence here?" Thomas chooses honesty as the best approach. "My grandfather, Captain William Blackwood, was stationed in Guatemala in 1945 as part of a U.S. military operation. He discovered that sacred objects were being removed from indigenous communities for study. He rescued these items and hid them here, documenting their origins so they could eventually be returned to their rightful communities." He produces William's journal, shows the meticulous records of each artifact's provenance, the coded system that links the journal entries to the tags on each object. "My intention is to ensure these sacred items are properly repatriated to the communities they were taken from. I've been working with Dr. Elena Cortez from the University of Guatemala, who specializes in cultural heritage repatriation." The officer studies the journal with evident interest. "And these others?" He gestures toward Diaz and his associates. "They represent a private collector who learned about this location. Their interest appears to be acquisition rather than repatriation." Diaz steps forward, presenting documents of his own. We have permits for archaeological survey work in this region, signed by the Ministry of Culture. Any discoveries fall under the jurisdiction of those permits. The standoff creates a moment of uncertainty. Legitimate arguments exist on both sides. The permits Hernandez has obtained versus the clear documentation of these objects' origins and the moral imperative to return them to their communities. As the officers consult among themselves, Elena and Miguel reappear from the deeper passages, having heard the official voices and recognized an opportunity for resolution. Elena immediately engages with the officers, her academic credentials and Guatemalan citizenship providing additional legitimacy to their presence. She explains the cultural significance of the artifacts, the research documenting their removal during the ECHO project, and the international protocols governing repatriation of indigenous cultural heritage. The lead officer makes a decision. All artifacts will be cataloged in place, then secured under government protection while ownership is determined. No one removes anything until proper procedures are followed. It's a bureaucratic solution that prevents immediate theft, but delays the ultimate goal of repatriation. Still, it's preferable to Hernandez gaining possession of sacred objects that would likely disappear into private collections. As the officers begin photographing and documenting the chamber's contents, Diaz approaches Thomas with unexpected candor. You know this isn't over, Professor. Mr. Hernandez has considerable influence with certain government officials. These items may end up in a national museum rather than returned to villages that lack proper security or preservation capabilities. That should be the community's decision, Thomas counters. These aren't just art objects or archaeological specimens. They're living cultural heritage with ongoing spiritual significance. Diaz shrugs. A noble perspective, but perhaps impractical in a country still recovering from decades of civil war and economic instability. When the exchange highlights the complex realities of cultural heritage work in post-colonial contexts, balancing preservation needs against community rights, navigating political influences and economic pressures, addressing historical injustices while acknowledging present limitations. As the official documentation continues, Thomas finds himself drawn back to the obsidian mirror. Its mysterious surface still shifts and changes as he observes his reflection, still suggests alterations to his features that seem to reveal something deeper than physical appearance. It shows not what you are, but what you must become, his grandfather had written. Standing before the ancient artifact, surrounded by sacred objects his grandfather had risked his career to protect, Thomas begins to understand the meaning of that cryptic note. The heritage protection officers establish a security perimeter around the cave entrance, effectively preventing Diaz's team from returning unsupervised. Additional personnel are summoned to maintain 24-hour surveillance until a formal archaeological assessment can be conducted and representatives from relevant indigenous communities can be consulted. Thomas, Elena, and Miguel are permitted to leave after providing detailed statements and contact information. As they make their way back along the stone ledge behind the waterfall, the full moon still illuminates the cascade with ethereal light, the wayfinder's jade surface catching and amplifying the glow as Thomas carries it in his open palm. What happens now, Thomas asks as they follow the trail back towards San Pedro. Will these objects actually be returned to their communities, or will they disappear into government storage facilities and museum basements? Elena's expression mixes caution with determination. The legal process will be complicated, but we have advantages our predecessors didn't. International repatriation protocols, indigenous rights legislation, academic support for cultural restoration. And most importantly, your grandfather's documentation proving provenance. Miguel adds his perspective as they navigate the difficult terrain by moonlight. The elders have waited 7 decades. They can wait a little longer if necessary. What matters is that the sacred objects have been found, that the path to their return has been opened. The acknowledgement provides some comfort, but Thomas can't help feeling that their discovery has initiated a process with uncertain outcomes. Bureaucracy, politics, competing interests, all could delay or derail the ultimate goal of returning these sacred items to their rightful communities. As they reach the ridge overlooking Lake Atitlan, now a vast expanse of darkness reflecting the moon's bright face, Thomas pauses to consult the journal one final time. A page he had overlooked earlier catches his attention, a section written in a different ink, possibly added years after the initial entries. When I concealed these sacred objects, I believed I was protecting them from exploitation and destruction. But in doing so, I separated them from the communities they were meant to serve, from the traditions that gave them meaning beyond their physical form. This was necessary but incomplete. True protection requires not just preservation, but restoration, returning what was taken to where it belongs, reconnecting what was separated by colonial violence and military expediency. If you are reading this, you have found what I could not return. The harder task lies ahead, ensuring these sacred objects complete their journey home. The passage resonates with Thomas's own growing understanding of his responsibility. This isn't just about finding treasure or solving a family mystery. It's about addressing historical wrongs, about completing a moral mission his grandfather had begun but could not finish. As they continue their descent toward the lake, a new sound reaches them. Helicopter rotors thumping through the night sky. A powerful searchlight sweeps the forested slopes, eventually focusing on the waterfall area they have just left. Hernandez, Elena says grimly. He's not giving up easily. The realization adds urgency to their mission. The private collector clearly has resources and determination to match his acquisitive ambitions. The heritage protection officers might maintain their security perimeter for now, but bureaucratic attention spans are limited. Funding for remote site protection notoriously unreliable. We need to accelerate the repatriation process, Thomas decides, before Hernandez finds a way to exploit legal loopholes or political connections. The helicopter circles the waterfall area once more, then turns toward Guatemala City, its lights diminishing with distance but its implied threat remaining. The race for the sacred objects of Cascade Sagrada has entered a new phase, one that will test not just their determination, but their ability to navigate complex systems of power, law, and cultural politics. As San Pedro's lights become visible along the lakeshore below, Thomas feels the weight of the wayfinder in his pocket, the jade pendant now cool against his thigh. Like his grandfather before him, he has found himself in an unexpected moral struggle, caught between powerful interests and vulnerable communities, between historical injustice and possible restoration. The waterfall's secret has been revealed. What happens next will determine whether that revelation leads to healing or to further exploitation of communities that have already endured centuries of cultural disruption. Dawn breaks over Lake Atitlan, golden light spilling across the water's surface and illuminating the three volcanoes that stand sentinel around its shores. In San Pedro La Laguna, the day begins with familiar rhythms, fishermen checking their nets, women preparing corn dough for tortillas, children walking to school in neat uniforms. But among the morning routines, an unusual gathering takes place at Elder Mateo's home. Representatives from 4 indigenous communities around the lake have arrived in response to urgent messages, respected elders, spiritual leaders, and community advocates. They sit in a circle on Mateo's patio, the morning air still cool enough to make the steaming cups of local coffee welcome comfort. Thomas, Elena, and Miguel have spent the night preparing documentation from William's journal, translating entries, organizing photographs, creating a comprehensive catalog of the artifacts discovered in the cave. Now they present this information to the assembled leaders, explaining the history of the Echo Project, William Blackwood's intervention, and the current situation with the heritage protection officers securing the site. Elder Mateo serves as both host and mediator, his status within the indigenous communities providing crucial legitimacy to the proceedings. The discussion unfolds in multiple languages, Spanish serving as a common tongue, but key concepts often expressed in Zutujil, Cachiquel, or Quiche to capture nuances that Spanish cannot adequately convey. The atmosphere is complex, excitement about the discovery mingled with justified suspicion of government intervention, hope for repatriation, tempered by decades of disappointment with official processes. These communities have heard promises before, have seen their cultural heritage displayed in museums, while their ceremonial practices were dismissed as superstition. A woman in her 60s, identified as Anna Kokom, a spiritual leader from the Quiche community, studies the photographs of ceremonial vessels with particular attention. These containers were used by our grandmother's grandmothers to hold sacred waters during transition ceremonies. When they disappeared, the ceremonies continued, but something essential was lost, like speaking with a diminished vocabulary. Our young people know the words, but have never seen the vessels that give those words physical form. Similar recognitions occur throughout the meeting. Jade ornaments once worn by spiritual leaders during healing rituals, obsidian implements used for astronomical calculations, textile fragments bearing cosmological patterns that connect earthly practices to celestial movements. Each artifact represents not just historical significance, but living cultural knowledge maintained despite their absence. Thomas observes the process with academic respect and personal humility. His grandfather's journal provides important documentation, but these community members are the true experts, the ones who understand these objects' place within living traditions rather than simply categorizing them as archaeological specimens. As the meeting progresses, Elena receives a call from her university colleague who has connections within the Department of Cultural Heritage. She steps away briefly, then returns with troubling news. Hernandez is moving quickly. He's filed legal papers claiming these artifacts fall under his exploration permits. More concerning, he's arranged a meeting with the Minister of Culture this afternoon. His company has previously sponsored museum renovations, creating political leverage. The information shifts the gathering's focus from identification to strategy. These communities have navigated Guatemalan politics and bureaucracy for generations, developing sophisticated approaches to protecting their interests despite systemic disadvantages. A younger leader named Carlos, who serves as legal advisor to several indigenous municipalities, outlines the relevant laws. The 2003 Cultural Heritage Protection Act includes provisions for repatriation of ceremonial objects to recognized indigenous communities. The challenge is documentation, proving these specific items originated from specific communities before their removal. Thomas indicates William's journal. My grandfather documented everything: which communities these objects came from, their ceremonial purposes, the circumstances of their collection by the Echo Project. Would these records satisfy legal requirements? Carlos examined several pages, his expression cautiously optimistic. This is exceptionally detailed for the period. Combined with community testimony and the knowledge we've maintained about these objects, we have a strong case. But legal processes move slowly. Hernandez will exploit that delay. Elena's university position provides another avenue. The University of Guatemala's Indigenous Cultural Heritage Program could request temporary custody for academic documentation while repatriation claims are processed. That would prevent immediate acquisition by Hernandez while legal determinations are made. The strategy discussion continues. Multiple approaches considered, respective strengths and vulnerabilities assessed. These communities have survived centuries of colonial pressure, military dictatorships, and economic exploitation by developing resilient decision-making processes that combine traditional wisdom with practical adaptability. By mid-morning, they've developed a multifaceted approach. Formal repatriation claims will be filed by each community. The university will request academic access. International indigenous rights organizations will be contacted for support, and traditional spiritual protocols will be observed to maintain proper relationship with the sacred objects during this transitional period. Thomas's role becomes clear. His academic credentials, family connection to the artifact's protection, and status as an American citizen provide unique standing in the process. He will serve as witness, advocate, and conduit for his grandfather's documentation, supporting the community's claims while respecting their leadership. As the meeting concludes, Anna Kokom approaches Thomas with quiet intensity. Your grandfather did something rare for his time. He recognized that these were not merely objects to be studied, but living connections between our people and our ancestral wisdom. Now you must complete what he began. The responsibility weighs heavily on Thomas's shoulders as they prepare to meet with heritage protection officials later that day. His initial motivation, finding financial salvation through possible treasure, seems almost absurd now that he understands the true significance of what William Blackwood protected. At the regional office of the Department of Cultural Heritage in Panajachel, the formal process begins. The head officer, Director Vasquez, has arrived from Guatemala City to personally oversee this unusual case. His office reflects the department's limited resources, functional but sparse, with outdated computers and overflowing filing cabinets, suggesting the challenges of documenting a country rich in archaeological and cultural heritage. Vasquez reviews the preliminary reports with professional thoroughness, occasionally consulting reference materials or making notes. His demeanor remains neutral, giving little indication of which way his decisions might lean. This situation presents unique complexities, he finally states, looking up from the documents. The artifacts were removed during an American military operation, concealed for 75 years, and are now claimed by multiple parties, indigenous communities citing ceremonial ownership, Mr. Hernandez citing his exploration permits, and potentially the national government as objects of significant cultural importance. Elena interjects with academic precision. Director, these are not merely archaeological specimens. They are sacred objects with ongoing ceremonial significance to living communities. International protocols prioritize indigenous claims in such cases. I'm familiar with the protocols, Dr. Cortez, Vasquez responds, neither dismissive nor particularly supportive. I'm also familiar with budgetary realities, political pressures, and the practical challenges of securing artifacts valued at millions on the international market. The implied concern is clear. Whatever his personal views on proper repatriation, Vasquez operates within systems that don't always prioritize indigenous rights over powerful financial and political interests. Thomas decides on directness. Directors Vasquez, my grandfather protected these objects at considerable personal risk because he believed they belonged with their communities. His detailed documentation was created specifically to facilitate their eventual return. Captain Blackwood's actions were commendable, Professor. They were also unauthorized removal of artifacts from an official U.S. military operation, technically a court-martial offense at the time. Vasquez's observation isn't accusatory but pragmatic. Legal complexities abound in this case. The meeting continues for over an hour, procedural requirements discussed, documentation reviewed, competing claims acknowledged. Vasquez maintains professional detachment throughout, making no promises but ensuring all perspectives are properly recorded. As they prepare to leave, Vasquez offers one personal observation. For what it's worth, Professor, I believe your grandfather made a moral choice under difficult circumstances. Whether our current systems can honor that choice remains to be seen. The ambiguous conclusion leaves Thomas unsettled as they exit the government building. The legal machinery has been set in motion, but its outcome remains uncertain. Bureaucratic processes designed for archaeological specimens may not adequately address the living cultural significance of these sacred objects. Elena checks her phone, finding multiple messages from university colleagues. Hernandez is meeting with the minister when as expected. He's offering to fund a new wing for the National Museum, with these artifacts as the centerpiece exhibition. The news isn't surprising but reinforces the urgency of their situation. Powerful interests are aligning around a narrative that presents museum acquisition as preservation rather than continued separation of sacred objects from their ceremonial contexts. Miguel, who has been quiet during the official meeting, now offers practical direction. We should return to Cascade Sagrada. The legal process will take its course, but there are traditional protocols that should be observed while the sacred objects remain in the cave. His suggestion reflects an understanding that this situation operates on multiple levels: legal, academic, spiritual. While documentation and advocacy proceed through official channels, proper ceremonial acknowledgement maintains the relationship between communities and their sacred objects. They arrange for a boat to take them back across the lake, then begin the climb toward the waterfall. The heritage protection officers maintain their post at the cave entrance, checking identification and recording their visit, but allowing access based on Director Vasquez's authorization. The cave chamber feels different in daylight, illuminated by the portable lights the heritage team has installed. The sacred objects remain in their original positions, each now bearing additional tags from the official documentation process. Two officers maintain watchful presence, professional but not interfering, as Miguel performs traditional acknowledgments with Amo, with copal incense and quiet prayers in Chizutu-jo. Thomas is drawn once again to the obsidian mirror, its mysterious surface still producing the same unsettling effect of showing his reflection subtly altered. In daylight, he notices details previously obscured. The intricate jade and gold frame bears symbols that match entries in his grandfather's journal, specific patterns that William had meticulously recorded but not fully interpreted. As Thomas studies these markings, Elena approaches with one of the heritage officers, a young woman who has been reviewing the official inventory. There's something unusual in the cataloging, Elena explains. Several artifacts documented in your grandfather's journal don't appear in the cave, yet there's no evidence of recent removal or disturbance. The observation triggers Thomas's academic curiosity. Could they have been moved earlier? Perhaps deteriorated naturally over time? The officer shakes her head. The preservation conditions are exceptional, and the arrangement matches the original documentation too precisely for partial removal. Thomas consults William's journal, comparing the inventory with the chamber's contents. The discrepancy is subtle but definite. Approximately 15 objects mentioned in the journal are not present, including several described as particularly significant. These missing items, Thomas notes, reviewing the list, they're all from the same community tradition, all Kachiko ceremonial objects. The realization prompts further investigation. They examine the chamber more carefully, looking for any indication of secondary storage areas or alternative explanations. Miguel inspects the walls methodically, his understanding of traditional cave usage providing insights a conventional archaeologist might miss. Here, he eventually calls from a section of the chamber partially obscured by a natural limestone formation. There are markings. The symbols carved into the rock surface are weathered but recognizable, matching both the Wayfinder pendant and specific notations in William's journal. They gather around as Miguel traces the markings with his finger, translating their significance. This indicates a boundary between worlds, a threshold that separates different types of sacred space. Thomas consults the journal again, finding annotations he had previously overlooked. William had documented not just the artifacts themselves, but the traditional knowledge about proper ceremonial storage. Certain objects required particular conditions, specific orientations, separate spaces to maintain their spiritual integrity. My grandfather created multiple chambers, Thomas realizes. He wasn't just hiding these objects, he was respecting their traditional requirements. The heritage officer calls her supervisor, requesting permission to expand their investigation to locate possible additional chambers. After brief consultation, they're authorized to proceed with non-invasive methods, careful not to disturb the cave's structural integrity. Their search focuses on areas where the natural limestone formations might conceal constructed passages. The journal provides subtle clues, references to the secondary repository and chambers appropriate to distinct traditions. But the breakthrough comes from Miguel's traditional knowledge rather than William's documentation. In sacred cave complexes, transitions between spaces often align with water flow patterns, he explains, examining where moisture trails down the chamber walls. The ancients understood how water reveals hidden pathways. Following this guidance, they discover a narrow opening partially concealed behind a limestone column. The passage beyond is tight but navigable, requiring them to proceed single file, flashlights illuminating a tunnel that descends deeper into the mountain. After approximately 30 feet, the passage opens into a second chamber, smaller than the first but arranged with the same careful attention to preservation. Here they find the missing Kachikal artifacts, ceremonial masks, divination tools, stone tablets carved with calendar systems, textile elements that would have been worn by spiritual leaders during specific ceremonies. Your grandfather understood, Miguel observes with evident respect. These objects belong to a tradition that requires separation from other ceremonial items. He honored that requirement even while hiding them from the Echo Project. The discovery reinforces Thomas's evolving understanding of William Blackwood, not merely a military officer who rescued artifacts, but someone who took the time to learn and respect indigenous knowledge systems, who recognized the sophisticated cultural frameworks these objects belonged within. As they document this second chamber, the heritage officer receives a radio call from the surface. Her expression grows concerned as she listens, then turns to address the group. There's a situation developing. A team has arrived with documentation from the Ministry of Culture authorizing immediate transfer of all artifacts to the National Museum for emergency preservation assessment. Elena responds with immediate suspicion. Hernandez, he's using political connections to circumvent the normal procedures. The officer nods grimly. The authorization bears the minister's signature. My supervisor is verifying its authenticity, but if legitimate, we're required to comply. The development creates immediate urgency. If these sacred objects are removed to the National Museum under Hernandez's influence, the community's repatriation claims could be substantially delayed or derailed entirely. The objects might be classified as national patrimony, displayed in glass cases separated from their ceremonial contexts and the communities that give them meaning. Thomas makes a quick decision, drawing on both his grandfather's example and his own evolving commitment to completing William's mission. We need to inform the community representatives immediately. They should be present for any transfer, ensuring proper protocols are followed and their claims are formally registered before removal. Elena makes calls to the community leaders while the heritage officer returns to the surface to assess the situation. Thomas, left with Miguel in the second chamber, continues examining his grandfather's arrangement of the sacred objects, noting the precise care taken with their placement and orientation. As he studies a particularly intricate ceremonial mask, Thomas notices something unusual. A small leather pouch tucked behind one of the stone display platforms, partially concealed but accessible. The pouch appears to be military issue, the type that would have been standard equipment during William's service. Thomas carefully retrieves the pouch, immediately recognizing his grandfather's methodical approach. The leather has been treated to resist moisture, the closure designed to maintain a seal against the cave's humidity. Inside, he finds a sealed metal container, and within that, documents preserved in remarkable condition despite the decades in the cave. The documents are in a part of William's official journal, but appear to be personal letters, never sent. The first is addressed to Thomas's grandmother, dated October 1945, shortly before William's return from Guatemala. Dearest Margaret, what I've witnessed here has changed me in ways I cannot fully express. The ECHO project began as scientific documentation, but revealed itself as something darker, the systematic exploitation of indigenous knowledge under the guise of academic study. I've taken actions that could be considered treasonous if discovered, but which my conscience demanded. I've hidden sacred objects that were to be removed for analysis, objects that maintain living connections between these communities and their ancestral wisdom. I cannot tell you more in case this letter is intercepted, but know that if I seem altered upon my return, it is because I have seen both the depths of my country's arrogance and the heights of its potential for redemption. The letter provides context for William's actions that goes beyond what the journal documented, not just the mechanical details of what he did, but the moral reasoning behind his decisions. Thomas feels a deepening connection to the grandfather he had admired but never fully understood. The second document proves even more consequential. A letter addressed to my unknown grandchild, with instructions that it be preserved with the artifacts themselves. If you are reading this, then you have found what I could not return in my lifetime. There is something you must know beyond what I've documented in my official journal. During my time in Guatemala, I formed a deep connection with these communities, particularly with a woman named Lucia Cuxel, who taught me the traditional knowledge necessary to properly protect these sacred objects. Our connection grew beyond professional collaboration, and before I returned to the United States, I learned she was carrying my child. Military regulations, social conventions, and my existing marriage made it impossible for me to acknowledge this publicly. I provided financial support through discreet channels, but never returned to Guatemala despite my promises to do so. This failure has haunted me throughout my life. If my calculations are correct, you who find this letter may have family here you've never known. Cousins, perhaps, who share your blood and heritage. This connection is perhaps more important than the artifacts themselves, the living legacy of choices made under impossible circumstances. The revelation hits Thomas with physical force, family connections he never suspected, a hidden chapter of William's life that explains the emotional weight evident in parts of the journal. Not just professional obligation but personal responsibility had driven his grandfather's actions. Miguel, seeing Thomas's reaction, approaches with concern. What is it? Thomas hands him the letter, watching as the young guide's expression shifts from curiosity to shocked recognition. Lucia Coxel was my grandmother, Miguel says quietly after reading the document. The woman you met in the market, she is my mother. The connection that has been building subtly throughout their journey suddenly crystallizes. The unexplained familiarity Thomas had felt toward Miguel, the way Lucia had recognized something in Thomas's features, the shared sense of purpose that had aligned their actions without explicit coordination. We're family, Thomas says, the words feeling simultaneously foreign and deeply true. Cousins. Miguel processes this information with remarkable composure, cultural frameworks allowing him to integrate unexpected revelations within existing understandings of how the world works. The elders speak of blood connections that remain even when unknown, he says finally. This explains why the Wayfinder responded to your touch as it would to someone of traditional lineage. You carry both bloodlines, the protector and the protected. The personal revelation reframes everything about their mission. What began as Thomas's search for financial salvation, then evolved into an ethical obligation to complete his grandfather's work, now reveals itself as something more profound. A reconnection with family he never knew existed, with cultural heritage that is partially his own through William's relationship with Lucia. Their moment of recognition is interrupted by Elena's return to the chamber, her expression reflecting both urgency and determination. Hernandez himself is here with the transfer team. The authorization appears legitimate, the minister's office confirms it, but the community representatives are on their way, demanding proper ceremonial protocols before any objects are moved. The situation above has escalated quickly. The narrow passage to the second chamber remains undiscovered by the new arrivals, providing temporary protection for the cachical artifacts. But the main chamber's contents are immediately vulnerable to removal. Thomas makes a decision based on both practical assessment and moral clarity. We need to delay the transfer until the community representatives arrive, not through confrontation but through proper procedure. They return to the main chamber where Hernandez now directs a team of technicians preparing specialized containers for artifact transport. The private collector is a commanding presence, tall, impeccably dressed despite the cave setting, projecting the confident authority of someone accustomed to obstacles being removed from his path. Professor Blackwood, Hernandez acknowledges Thomas with professional courtesy, if not warmth. Your grandfather's documentation has proven invaluable in identifying these artifacts. The National Museum will ensure proper credit in the exhibition. These objects aren't museum pieces, Mr. Hernandez. They're ceremonial items with ongoing significance to living communities. Their representatives are en route and have legal standing to oversee any transfer. Hernandez's expression reveals a flash of annoyance quickly masked by diplomatic smoothness. Of course, local input is valuable. However, the ministerial authorization prioritizes immediate preservation assessment. Community consultation can continue once the artifacts are properly secured. The heritage officers present maintain professional neutrality, bound by the ministerial authorization despite potential personal reservations. The power dynamics are clear. Official documentation outweighs ethical considerations in bureaucratic hierarchies. Thomas changes tactics, drawing on his academic expertise. Director Vasquez confirmed that proper documentation protocols must be completed on-site before transfer. My grandfather's journal contains specific information about handling requirements for each item, information essential to prevent damage during transport. The appeal to preservation standards creates legitimate procedural grounds for delay. Even Hernandez, despite his political connections, cannot risk damaging artifacts valued in the millions through improper handling. As the technical discussion about documentation requirements continues, community representatives begin arriving at the cave entrance. First Elder Mateo, then Anna Cocom, and others from the morning meeting. The heritage officers, following protocol, permit their entry as registered stakeholders in the official process. The cave chamber becomes increasingly crowded as community representatives, heritage officers, Hernandez's team, and Thomas's group all occupy the limited space. The atmosphere grows tense but remains civil. Centuries of navigating colonial power structures have taught indigenous leaders when confrontation is productive and when strategic patience better serves their interests. Elder Mateo approaches the obsidian mirror that had captured Thomas's attention. standing before it with ceremonial composure. Rather than addressing Hernandez directly, he speaks to the heritage officers in formal Spanish. Before these sacred objects move, traditional acknowledgement must be performed. This is not negotiable under Section 17 of the Cultural Heritage Protection Act, which recognizes indigenous ceremonial protocols as legally protected practices. The citation of specific legal provisions demonstrates sophisticated engagement with the same systems often used against indigenous interests. The heritage officers recognize both the legitimacy of the request and the potential consequences of denying protected religious expression. The senior officer turns to Hernandez. Sir, ceremonial acknowledgement is indeed protected under statute. It need not delay preparations, but must precede actual removal. Hernandez recognizes a battle not worth fighting, especially with multiple witnesses present. Of course, we respect traditional practices. Please proceed with whatever ceremonies are appropriate. What follows is not the brief symbolic gesture Hernandez likely anticipated, but a comprehensive ceremonial acknowledgement that Elena quietly explains will necessarily take several hours to complete properly. Each community representative must address specific objects according to traditional protocols, maintaining unbroken continuity with practices that predate European contact. The procedural delay creates space for additional community members to arrive, for legal advisors to file formal documentation asserting repatriation claims, and for university representatives to establish academic research interests that could justify temporary placement at the University of Guatemala rather than immediate transfer to the National Museum. Throughout this process, Thomas observes how effectively the indigenous leaders navigate between traditional practice and modern legal systems, using ceremonial requirements as legitimate strategic tools while simultaneously advancing their formal claims through official channels. By late afternoon, the situation has evolved considerably. Director Vasquez himself arrives, having reviewed the competing claims and documentation. His presence elevates the procedural authority present, providing counterbalance to Hernandez's political connections. After consultation with the legal department, Vasquez announces to the assembled groups, I must advise that these artifacts cannot be transferred until competing ownership claims are properly adjudicated. The ministerial authorization addresses preservation assessment, but cannot override established repatriation procedures for ceremonial objects under international protocols, to which Guatemala is a signatory. Hernandez's carefully maintained composure shows signs of strain. Director, the minister's authorization was quite clear. These artifacts require immediate assessment by national experts. Assessment can be conducted in situ, Mr. Hernandez. My department has portable equipment for non-invasive analysis. Vasquez's tone remains professionally neutral, but his position is unmistakable. The legal status of these objects is complex, requiring thorough review before any removal from their current location. The bureaucratic impasse represents a temporary victory for the community's interests, creating a procedural shield against immediate acquisition by either Hernandez or the national government. Director Vasquez, whatever his personal views, has chosen to follow proper protocols rather than expedient political accommodation. As the various parties begin negotiating next steps, Miguel draws Thomas aside, speaking quietly. The second chamber remains undiscovered. The Kaqchikel artifacts are still protected. The observation highlights an important decision point. They could reveal the second chamber, ensuring all artifacts are properly documented in the official process, or they could maintain its secrecy temporarily, preserving a direct connection between sacred objects and community traditions outside institutional control. Thomas weighs both his academic ethics and his evolving understanding of his responsibility to these communities that he now knows include his own extended family. The revelation of William's relationship with Lucia has transformed his perspective, making this not just an academic or ethical issue, but a deeply personal one. We should inform Anna Kokom, Thomas decides. Let the Kaqchikel representatives determine how to proceed with their sacred objects. The approach acknowledges that these decisions rightfully belong with the communities themselves, rather than with external authorities, however well-intentioned. Thomas has come to understand that his role is supportive rather than directive, using his position and access to create space for indigenous leadership rather than imposing his own judgment. Anna Kokam receives the information about the second chamber with the gravity it deserves. After consulting briefly with other Kaqchikel elders present, she makes a decisive judgment. We will reveal the chamber's existence to Director Vasquez only. The objects must be officially documented to establish our claim, but their specific location should remain protected from those who see only their market value. The strategic decision balances legal requirements with cultural protection, acknowledging official processes while maintaining community control over sacred knowledge. Thomas realizes he's witnessing generations of experience navigating between traditional values and colonial systems, finding spaces for agency within constraints imposed by external powers. Director Vasquez is discreetly informed about the second chamber. His response demonstrates professional integrity. He follows proper documentation protocols, but limits access to the minimum necessary personnel, excluding Hernandez's team under the justification of space constraints in the narrow passage. As twilight approaches, the cave empties gradually. Hernandez departs with poorly concealed frustration. Heritage officers establish a more permanent security presence, and community representatives make arrangements for traditional guardians to maintain ceremonial connection with the sacred objects while legal processes unfold. Thomas, Elena, and Miguel are among the last to leave, making their way down the mountain in the gathering darkness. The Wayfinder pendant, returned to its wooden box, rests in Thomas's pocket, its purpose fulfilled in revealing the cave entrance, but its significance now extended to represent his unexpected connection to Guatemala. At the lakeshore, as they prepare to board the lancha that will return them to San Pedro, Thomas pauses to look back at the distant waterfall, now just a silver thread visible in the moonlight. The journey that began with desperate hope for financial salvation has transformed into something profoundly different, not just the discovery of sacred objects worth millions, but the revelation of family connections worth immeasurably more. The following weeks bring rapid developments. Thomas extends his stay in Guatemala, dividing his time between legal proceedings in Guatemala City and deepening relationships with his newly discovered family in San Pedro. The university where Elena teaches offers him a visiting scholar position, providing institutional support for his continued involvement in the repatriation process. Most significantly, Lucia, the woman from the market who Thomas now knows is his father's half-sister, shares family history that William's journal never recorded. The financial support his grandfather sent arrived consistently for decades, funding educational opportunities for her and her siblings, establishing a small weaving cooperative that still operates, providing healthcare access during difficult periods of Guatemala's civil conflict. He never returned as he promised, Lucia tells Thomas during a family gathering at her home. But he did not abandon us entirely. The money came with letters I could not read as a child but kept safe. Later, when I learned English, I understood his words. He spoke of regret, of duty, of love for the child he would never know. The revelation complicates Thomas's understanding of his grandfather further, a man who made difficult choices under impossible circumstances, who fell short of his ideals but attempted to fulfill obligations across barriers of geography, culture, and convention. The neat categories of hero or villain, moral exemplar or flawed human, dissolve into something more nuanced and perhaps more honest. The repatriation process advances through legal channels with unexpected momentum. International attention proves decisive. UNESCO representatives arrive to observe proceedings. Indigenous rights organizations provide legal support. Academic institutions worldwide issue statements supporting community claims based on international repatriation principles. Hernandez's political influence meets countervailing forces he hadn't anticipated. His museum wing proposal loses appeal when framed as potential cultural appropriation in international media. The Minister of Culture, initially supportive of his approach, recalibrates in response to diplomatic considerations and civil society pressure. 3 months after the discovery of Cascade Sagrada's secret, a formal ceremony marks the first return of sacred objects to their communities. The event takes place not in government offices, but at a traditional ceremonial site overlooking Lake Atitlan, neutral ground where representatives from all claiming communities gather to witness this historic restitution. The objects returned in this first phase include those with clearest documentation, artifacts William had recorded with specific information about their origins, supported by community testimony about their ceremonial significance. Others remain under protection while more complex provenance questions are resolved, but the precedent has been established. Thomas observes the ceremony from a respectful distance, understanding that his role in this moment is witness rather than participant. The sacred objects move from government custody to community guardianship through protocols that reconnect them to traditions maintained across generations of separation. Director Vasquez, representing the Department of Cultural Heritage, speaks briefly but significantly. Today marks an important evolution in our understanding of cultural patrimony. These are not merely artifacts of historical interest, but living elements of continuing traditions. Their return acknowledges that preservation includes not just physical conservation, but maintaining connections between sacred objects and the communities that give them meaning. The formal statement represents a small but meaningful shift in institutional perspective, one that might influence future cases beyond these specific artifacts. Thomas recognizes that such incremental changes in official positions, accumulated over time, create space for more fundamental transformations in how cultural heritage is understood and managed. As the ceremony concludes, Anna Kokum approaches Thomas with unexpected news. The communities have reached a decision about recognition of your contribution to the return of our sacred objects. The announcement makes Thomas immediately uncomfortable. He has deliberately avoided discussions of financial compensation, understanding the inappropriate nature of expecting reward for returning what should never have been taken. Anna perceives his discomfort with the sensitivity of someone attuned to unspoken concerns. This is not about money, Professor Blackwood, though there will be that as well. A finder's reward consistent with our traditions of reciprocity. 10% of the artifact's assessed value, as is customary in our communities when someone returns what was lost. The sum, approximately $6.7 million, is substantial but secondary to what Anna explains next. More importantly, the Council of Elders recognizes your dual heritage. Through your grandfather's actions and his relationship with Lucia's mother, you stand at the intersection of the cultures that shape this story. We acknowledge you as family returned, not just to Lucia and Miguel, but to our broader community. The recognition holds significance beyond any financial consideration. It represents acceptance of his complex identity, acknowledgement of obligations that transcend conventional boundaries, invitation to relationship rather than merely transactional interaction. The finder's reward carries responsibility, Anna continues. Not obligation imposed by us, but opportunity to continue healing the separation these sacred objects experienced. How you fulfill that responsibility is yours to determine. The conversation provides clarity about Thomas's path forward. The financial reward solves his immediate problems, ending his homelessness, providing security in his professional transition, but more importantly, it enables decisions based on relationship rather than necessity. 6 months after his desperate journey began, Thomas stands before a gathering at the University of Guatemala's Department of Anthropology. The audience includes academic colleagues, indigenous community representatives, government officials, and members of his extended family, biological and chosen. The formal presentation addresses the ECHO Project's historical significance, William Blackwood's protection of sacred objects, and the ongoing repatriation process that has successfully returned the first groups of artifacts to their communities. Slides show ceremonial reintegration events where objects hidden for 75 years resume their proper places in living traditions. But the technical presentation is merely prelude to a more personal announcement. Thomas officially introduces the William Blackwood Cultural Heritage Fellowship, funded by half of the finder's reward he received. The fellowship will support Indigenous scholars documenting traditional knowledge systems, ensuring academic resources serve community priorities rather than extractive research agendas. My grandfather made a moral choice under impossible circumstances, Thomas explains as he outlines the fellowship's purpose. He recognized that sacred objects belong with the communities that understand their significance beyond market value or academic categorization. This fellowship continues that recognition by supporting knowledge production that honors indigenous perspectives rather than objectifying them. The remaining portion of the finder's reward has been dedicated to establishing a small but secure home near the lake, a place where Thomas will spend part of each year maintaining connections with his extended family while teaching occasional courses at the university. It's not a conventional academic career path, but it represents integration of personal, professional, and ethical priorities in ways his previous position never achieved. Rebecca arrives the following week, Thomas's daughter from his marriage with Sarah, now meeting family she never knew existed. The connections form quickly despite language differences, shared features appearing across generations separated by geography and circumstance. She wears the small jade pendant Lucia gave her honeymoon, a token acknowledging blood relationship and welcome into a broader community. On a clear morning before Rebecca's departure, Thomas takes her to visit Cascade Sagrada one final time. The waterfall remains as magnificent as when he first approached it. Twin columns of water plunging into the crystalline pool below, mist creating rainbows in the morning light. But the cave beyond has been transformed. With the most sacred objects returned to their communities and others secured under culturally appropriate protocols, the cave has begun transition to its next purpose, a site where traditions connected to these artifacts can be taught to younger generations. Small groups of community members now visit regularly, elders sharing knowledge with students, traditional practices reconnecting with their appropriate ceremonial objects. As they observe from a respectful distance, Rebecca asks the question that has hovered unspoken throughout her visit. Will you come back to the States? Or is this home now? The question captures the complexity of Thomas's current position, between cultures, between communities, between professional identities. His answer comes after thoughtful consideration. Both places are home now in different ways. I'll divide my time, teaching online courses for American universities while I'm here, returning to the States for part of each year. The university has offered a permanent position teaching cultural heritage ethics, focusing on repatriation practices. Rebecca nods, understanding her father's decision even as she processes what it means for their relationship. You've found purpose here, and family. I've found connection, Thomas corrects gently, to William's legacy, to these communities, to traditions that value relationships over possessions. But you remain my priority, my most important connection. The conversation continues as they make their way back down the mountain, discussing practical arrangements for maintaining their relationship across distance, planning future visits, acknowledging the challenges and opportunities this new family configuration presents. At the lakeshore, they pause before boarding the lancha that will return them to San Pedro. The obsidian mirror, one of the sacred objects returned to community guardianship, has been established in a small ceremonial space where authorized practitioners can access its divinatory properties. Thomas had been invited to view his reflection once more before its return, finding that the mysterious alterations it showed in his features had stabilized, still different from his physical appearance, but consistent now, as if showing what he had become rather than multiple possibilities of what he might be. The entrance reveals itself only to those who understand what they're truly seeking. William had written that cryptic note about the cave, but its meaning now extends beyond physical locations to the pathways between cultures, between generations, between who we believe ourselves to be and who we might become when we honor the complicated truths of our inheritance. As the lancha carries them across Lake Atitlan's blue expanse, Thomas recognizes that his journey hasn't ended, but transformed. From desperate search for financial salvation to ongoing exploration of responsibility, relationship, and reconciliation. The waterfall's secret has been revealed, but its significance continues to unfold in ways neither William Blackwood nor his grandson could have fully anticipated when they first approached its thundering cascade. 1 year later, Thomas Blackwood stands at the window of his modest lakeside home, watching the morning light transform the surface of Lake Atitlan into a canvas of gold and azure. The house isn't large, 3 bedrooms, an open living area, and a study lined with books in multiple languages, but it serves its purpose well, bridging worlds that once seemed impossibly distant. On his desk sits a framed photograph of William Blackwood in his Army uniform, the image now accompanied by a formal letter from the Department of Defense. The letter acknowledges Captain Blackwood's unauthorized but ethically sound decision to protect indigenous cultural heritage during the ECHO project. Not a full exoneration, but an official recognition that moral courage sometimes requires standing against one's own institution. The document arrived without fanfare, a bureaucratic response to Thomas's persistent inquiries into declassifying records related to the ECHO project. Its clinical language only hints at the complex reality behind Williams' actions. The impossible choices faced by a soldier recognizing the damage his own government's program might cause, the courage required to sabotage an official military operation, the personal compromises made to protect what he understood as more important than blind obedience. Thomas keeps this letter beside another document, the final distribution report, confirming that all sacred objects from Cascade Sagrada have been returned to their respective communities. The process took 15 months of legal proceedings, diplomatic negotiations, and institutional cooperation. Not everything went smoothly. Certain artifacts were claimed by multiple communities, requiring complex mediation. The National Museum argued successfully for temporary exhibition rights to select items before their permanent return. And Hernandez launched several legal challenges that delayed particular transfers. But the core principle held firm. These weren't merely archaeological specimens, but living connections between communities and their ancestral wisdom. Their proper place wasn't behind museum glass, but within ceremonial contexts that maintained traditions despite centuries of disruption and displacement. The finder's reward that Thomas received, just over $6 million after taxes and legal fees, has been carefully managed. Half established the William Blackwood Cultural Heritage Fellowship, supporting Indigenous scholars. The remainder provided this lakeside home, secured Rebecca's educational future, and created a modest foundation that funds documentation of traditional knowledge systems throughout the region. The university position teaching cultural heritage ethics occupies half the year, split between online courses and in-person seminars. The work is deeply satisfying, challenging students to consider the complex moral landscape of repatriation, preservation, and cross-cultural responsibility. Thomas no longer measures professional success by prestigious publications or career advancement, but by how effectively he facilitates understanding across different knowledge systems. From the study window, Thomas can see Miguel approaching along the lakeshore path. His cousin, the relationship now acknowledged openly, has become a bridge between traditional knowledge and contemporary education, using his environmental science degree to document ecological practices embedded in indigenous traditions. Their collaboration has produced a textbook on cultural heritage ethics that centers community perspectives rather than institutional priorities. On the wall beside the window hangs a small jade pendant, not the Wayfinder, which has been returned to community guardianship, but a simpler ornament Lucia gave Thomas as family recognition. Its presence reminds him daily of connections that transcend conventional boundaries, of responsibilities that span generations, of legacies more complex than simple categorization allows. Thomas's phone buzzes with a message from Sarah. Despite their divorce years earlier, she has remained a supportive presence, visiting Guatemala twice to meet his extended family. Her message confirms travel arrangements for next month, when she and Rebecca will attend the formal opening of the Community Cultural Center that houses several sacred objects from Cascade Sagrada, now accessible for ceremonial use while protected from environmental damage and potential theft. Outside, the market day activity in San Pedro creates a backdrop of voices, music, and movement, the rhythms of a community that has incorporated Thomas without demanding he abandon other aspects of his identity. He participates in certain ceremonies when invited, contributes to community projects when appropriate, maintains respectful distance when traditional practices require privacy. The journal that started this journey rests on a dedicated shelf in the study. Its pages have been digitized, translated into Spanish in 3 Maya languages, made available to communities and scholars with proper cultural protocols observed. Williams' meticulous documentation proved crucial, not just for locating the artifacts, but for understanding their significance within living traditions. The ECHO project itself has become the subject of serious academic and governmental reassessment. Declassified documents confirm what Thomas had pieced together. An early Cold War program studying indigenous cultural resiliency to develop psychological warfare applications, measuring community responses to the removal of sacred objects, treating living traditions as laboratories for military research. The acknowledgement of this historical wrong doesn't erase its impact, but it creates space for addressing similar programs that remain classified, for examining how military and intelligence objectives continue to intersect with cultural heritage in troubling ways. Thomas has testified before a congressional subcommittee on this topic, bringing academic expertise and personal experience to policy discussions that might shape future approaches. Not everything has been resolved. Certain artifacts remain contested between communities and institutions. Legal frameworks still privilege Western concepts of ownership over indigenous understandings of relationship, and the broader patterns of cultural extraction continue in more subtle forms. But meaningful shifts have occurred in specific cases, in institutional perspectives, in public discourse about who rightfully determines the fate of sacred objects. As Thomas prepares for his morning seminar with students from both the University of Guatemala and visiting scholars from North American institutions, he reflects on the journey that transformed him from desperate academic to cultural bridge builder. The financial security he originally sought arrived eventually, but proved far less significant than the relationships, responsibilities, and purpose he discovered along the way. William Blackwood made difficult choices under impossible circumstances, some admirable, some flawed, all deeply human. His grandson has inherited not just the consequences of those choices, but the opportunity to address unfinished obligations, to heal separations, to continue work that spans generations. The waterfall continues its eternal flow behind the mountains visible from Thomas's window. Its secret chamber stands empty now, its purpose fulfilled. But the pathways it revealed, between cultures, between generations, between individual conscience and institutional loyalty, remain vital routes for those willing to navigate their complexity. For Thomas Blackwood, once homeless professor and now cultural mediator, the journey continues. The entrance reveals itself only to those who understand what they're truly seeking.